The bullet tore through the night air 6 inches from Cole Riker's head. He hit the ground hard, hand already on his Colt, scanning the darkness of his own property. But the threat wasn't aimed at him. Through the gun smoke and moonlight, he saw her, a young woman collapsed in the dirt, 3 riders bearing down on her position like wolves on wounded prey. She looked up at Cole with eyes that held no hope, only the terrible acceptance of what comes next. What happened in those next 10 seconds would shatter 8 years of carefully chosen isolation. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Stay with me through this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see just how far this tale travels. Because what you're about to hear is how one man's choice to break his own rules ignited a war that would baptize the frontier in blood and redemption. Now let me take you back to where it really started. The land that forgets nothing. The Wyoming Territory didn't forgive mistakes. Cole Riker had learned that lesson the hard way, which was the only way the frontier taught anything worth knowing. He'd carved his 160 acres out of raw wilderness 8 years back, built his cabin with timber he'd felled himself, and established exactly one rule that governed his entire existence: don't get involved. The rule had served him well. His days followed a rhythm as predictable as the seasons. Sunrise meant checking the fence line. Midday brought work in the small vegetable garden that kept him fed. Afternoons were for hunting or repairs, and evenings were for silence. The kind of deep, absolute silence that only came when you lived 15 miles from the nearest neighbor and had no intention of changing that distance. Cole was 34 years old and looked 40. The sun had weathered his face into something carved from leather, and his dark hair showed premature gray at the temples. He stood just over 6 feet, lean and hard in the way men get when every calorie gets burned in physical labor. His eyes were pale gray, the color of a winter sky before snow, and they held the particular emptiness of someone who'd seen enough to stop looking for anything new. He owned 2 horses, a bay gelding named Red for riding and a sturdy draft mare called Bess for heavy work. He had a cabin with 1 room, a loft for sleeping, and walls thick enough to keep out the worst of the winter. He had his Colt revolver, a Winchester rifle, and a scattergun for close work. He had 3 changes of clothes, a shelf of books he'd read so many times he could recite passages from memory, and a collection of tools maintained with religious care. What Cole Riker didn't have was complications. He didn't have friends who'd ask questions, didn't have family who'd expect visits, didn't have a wife who'd want conversation or children who'd need raising. He'd built a life stripped down to bare functionality, and most days that was enough. Most days he didn't think about why he'd chosen this existence. Most days he didn't remember what he'd lost that made isolation preferable to connection. But some days, usually when the wind came down from the mountains carrying the scent of pine and snow, he'd catch himself staring at the small wooden cross he'd carved and planted on the eastern edge of his property. On those days, the silence felt less like peace and more like punishment. This particular evening in late September started like any other. Cole had spent the afternoon replacing a section of fence where a fallen tree had crushed the rails. The work was mindless and physical, exactly the kind he preferred. By the time the sun started its descent toward the jagged peaks to the west, he'd finished the repairs and loaded his tools onto Bess's broad back. Red stood nearby, already saddled. Cole never unsaddled until full dark, another rule learned from harsh experience. On the frontier, the difference between ready and unready could be measured in heartbeats, and heartbeats determined who lived and who became another forgotten marker in unconsecrated ground. He swung into Red's saddle with practiced ease, took up the lead rope for Bess, and started the 2-mile ride back to the cabin. The September evening painted the sky in shades of amber and crimson. Grasshoppers clicked in the tall grass. A hawk circled overhead, scanning for one last meal before darkness made hunting impossible. Peace, routine, predictability. Cole had learned to trust the monotony. That should have been his first warning. The fence line. The northern boundary of Cole's property ran along a low ridge that offered a clear view of the valley beyond. He typically didn't ride this section except during monthly perimeter checks, but something, instinct, habit, or maybe just the restlessness that sometimes crept into his bones when autumn approached, made him turn Red toward the ridge instead of heading straight home. The detour would add maybe 20 minutes to his ride, small price for thoroughness. Red picked his way up the rocky slope with the sure-footed confidence of a horse who knew this terrain. Bess followed without complaint, content to let the gelding lead. Cole sat easy in the saddle, his body moving with the horse's rhythm, while his eyes scanned the landscape with the automatic assessment of someone who'd survived by paying attention. Nothing remarkable. Just the familiar sweep of grass and stone, the dark line of pines marking the creek bed, the distant purple shadows of mountains that never seemed to get any closer no matter how far you rode toward them. Then Red's ears pricked forward. The gelding's head came up, nostrils flaring slightly. Not the dramatic alarm of a horse sensing predator, but definite interest in something ahead. Cole's right hand dropped automatically to rest on his colt, while his left tightened slightly on the reins. "Easy," he murmured. Red snorted but kept walking. They crested the ridge, and Cole's breath caught. Smoke. Not the clean white smoke of a campfire, but the thick, dark column that came from burning structures. It rose from somewhere in the valley, maybe 3 miles northeast. Too far to see the source, but close enough to know it was substantial. Cole reined Red to a halt and sat motionless, calculating. Smoke meant people. People meant complications. And complications meant breaking his cardinal rule. The smart play was obvious. Turn around, ride home, and pretend he'd never seen anything. Whatever was burning, it wasn't his problem. Someone else's farm, someone else's disaster, someone else's life falling apart. The frontier was full of tragedies, and you couldn't rescue everyone who stumbled into one. You couldn't rescue anyone. Not really. Not when it mattered. Cole's jaw tightened. He gathered Red's reins, ready to turn back. That's when he heard the gunshot. The sound of trouble. Distance and terrain made it hard to judge exactly how far away the shot originated, but Cole's experienced ear placed it somewhere between 1 and 2 miles northeast, closer than the smoke, which meant whoever fired was likely fleeing from whatever was burning. A single shot could mean hunting, could mean someone putting down injured livestock, could mean a dozen harmless explanations. Cole sat frozen in the saddle, every instinct screaming at him to turn around. Then came the second shot, and the third. These weren't spaced out like someone tracking game. These came quick and purposeful, the rhythm of deliberate shooting. Either someone was in a hell of a firefight, or they were shooting at something that kept coming. Or someone. "Damn it," Cole whispered. Red shifted beneath him, picking up on his rider's tension. Bess stood patient and unconcerned, used to waiting while the humans figured out their business. Cole's hand remained on his colt. His eyes traced the terrain between his position and where he estimated the shots originated. Open ground mostly, with a few scattered rock formations and a thin line of cottonwoods marking what was probably a seasonal creek. No good cover, which meant anyone down there was exposed. More shots. 4, 5, 6 in rapid succession. Then silence. The silence lasted long enough that Cole almost convinced himself it was over. Whatever had happened was finished. Whoever won had won. Whoever lost had lost. And the smart thing remained turning around and forgetting he'd heard anything. Then came the scream. It cut through the evening air like a blade, high and desperate and unmistakably female. Not a scream of pain, but of terror, the sound of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen to them and couldn't stop it. The scream ended abruptly. Cole's hands moved before his brain finished processing. Red leaped forward into a gallop the instant he felt the shift in his rider's weight. Bess's lead rope jerked free from the saddle horn, leaving the draft mare behind as Cole sent Red racing down the ridge toward the valley floor. The smart thing, the safe thing, the thing that would keep him alive and uninvolved, all of that evaporated the moment that scream cut through the air. Some sounds you couldn't unhear. Some sounds dragged you back into the world, whether you wanted to return or not. Red's hooves pounded against the hardpan as they descended the slope. Cole leaned forward in the saddle, letting the gelding choose his own path through the rocks, while keeping his attention fixed on the terrain ahead. The sun had dropped below the mountains now, painting everything in shades of gray and shadow that made distance judgment treacherous. Another shot rang out, closer now. Then voices, male, multiple speakers, too far away to make out words but close enough to catch the tone. Harsh, aggressive. The way men sounded when they had prey cornered and were enjoying it. Cole's jaw set hard enough to make his teeth ache. They cleared the bottom of the ridge and Red stretched into a full run across the valley floor. The gelding's breathing came hard and steady, vapor streaming from his nostrils in the cooling evening air. Cole rose slightly in the stirrups. His weight balanced over Red's shoulders, his eyes scanning for targets. There. Movement near the cottonwoods. He hauled back on the reins and Red skidded to a halt, sides heaving. Cole swung down before the horse had fully stopped, Winchester already in his hands. He'd pulled it from the saddle scabbard without conscious thought, muscle memory taking over. Red stood ground-tied, well-trained enough not to bolt. Cole moved forward on foot, using the scattered rocks for cover as he approached the tree line. He could hear them clearly now, 3 distinct male voices, and they were laughing. "Ain't nowhere left to run, little bird. Come on out and we'll make it quick. Keep hiding and we'll take our time. Boss wants her alive, but he didn't say nothing about unmarked." More laughter, cruel and anticipatory. Cole reached a boulder about 50 yards from the cottonwoods and dropped into a crouch behind it. His eyes had adjusted to the fading light enough to make out shapes. 3 men on horseback, spread in a loose semicircle around a thick stand of trees and brush near the creek. They sat easy in their saddles, confident and unhurried. Men who did this often enough to have developed a routine. Hunters who knew their prey was trapped. One of them fired a shot into the brush, not aiming at anything particular, just making noise, making terror. "Last chance, girl. Come out walking, or we come in and drag you out." Cole's finger rested alongside the Winchester's trigger guard. Not on the trigger, never on the trigger until you'd made the final decision, but close enough. Ready. 3 against 1. Bad odds made worse by the fact they were expecting trouble from the brush, not from behind. If Cole announced himself, gave them a chance to surrender or ride off, he'd lose the advantage of surprise. If he didn't announce himself, he'd be shooting men from ambush. The moral calculus should have been complicated. It wasn't. Cole had seen enough of the frontier to recognize predators when he heard them. These men weren't cowboys who'd gotten drunk and rowdy. They weren't settlers defending their land. They were hunters. And whatever they were hunting, she'd been desperate enough to scream that way. That scream. It echoed in his memory, mixing with another scream from 8 years ago. Different voice. Same terror. His finger slid onto the trigger. "All right then," one of the riders said, and there was anticipation in his voice that made Cole's stomach turn. "We do this the hard way." The 3 men dismounted in unison, ground-tying their horses. They pulled rifles from their saddles and spread out, preparing to sweep the brush. Professional. Organized. Men who'd done this before. Cole rose from behind the boulder. "That's far enough." His voice cut through the evening air calm and flat, carrying the absolute certainty of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen. The Winchester was already at his shoulder, already aimed, already steady. All 3 men froze. Then, slowly, they turned. The first choice. For a handful of heartbeats, nobody moved. The tableau held perfect and crystalline. 3 men caught mid-sweep with rifles in hand, and 1 man standing alone in the open with his Winchester trained on the center rider. The math was simple and obvious. Cole couldn't shoot all 3 before the others shot him, but he could kill 1 for certain, maybe 2, and everyone standing in that clearing knew it. "Well now," the center rider said slowly. He was tall and raw-boned, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. Looked 40, could have been 30. The frontier-aged people. "Didn't expect company." "Leave," Cole said. "Now." Scarface smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Can't do that, friend. We got business here." "Had business. It's finished?" "Not until we collect what we came for." Scarface's eyes flicked to the brush, then back to Cole. "You know what's hiding in there?" "Don't care." "You should. She's stolen property, and we aim to return her." "Nobody's property," Cole said. "Leave now and ride away. Only warning you'll get." The rider on Scarface's right, shorter, wider through the shoulders, with a beard that covered most of his face, let out a low laugh. "One man with a rifle thinks he's going to stop 3 of us. That's entertaining." Cole's Winchester didn't waver. "Test it and find out." Scarface held up a hand, keeping his companions quiet. His eyes studied Cole with the assessment of someone who'd sized up dangerous men before and lived to talk about it. "You don't look stupid," Scarface said, "so I'm guessing you understand the situation. We don't want you. We want the girl. Let us take her and ride on, and you go back to whatever rock you crawled out from under. Simple." "No." "No?" Scarface's eyebrows rose. "You even know what she is? What she's done?" Doesn't matter. The hell it doesn't. That's $3,000 in stolen human property hiding in those trees. You're standing between us and legal recovery of goods. That makes you an outlaw yourself. Cole's expression didn't change. Count of 3. Then I start shooting. The bearded rider's hand twitched toward his pistol. Cole's Winchester shifted fractionally, centering on his chest. Don't. Bearded rider froze. Scarface's smile had vanished. His eyes held cold calculation now, weighing options. You know what? I believe you. I believe you'll shoot. And I believe you'll get one of us, maybe 2 before we put you down. Question is, you willing to die for something you found 5 minutes ago? 1. She ain't worth it, friend. She's nothing. Nobody. Just merchandise that ran away and we're taking her back. 2. The third rider, younger than the others, with nervous eyes and hands that trembled slightly, broke first. Jesus, Frank, he means it. Look at him. He's gonna... Shut up, Billy. 3. Cole's finger tightened on the trigger. Wait. Scarface. Frank. Threw both hands up, rifle pointing skyward. Wait. All right, you crazy son of a bitch. We're leaving. Rifles on the ground. Pistols, too. Like hell. Cole fired. The shot cracked through the evening air, and bearded rider's hat flew off his head, spinning away into the darkness. The man dropped flat with a strangled shout, hands covering his skull. Cole worked the Winchester's lever, chambering another round. The empty brass clinked against stone. Next one goes lower. Rifles, pistols, now. The 3 men moved slowly, carefully, and dropped their weapons. Frank's face had gone tight with rage, but his eyes held something else underneath, a recalculation. Whoever he'd expected to find out here, it wasn't someone who'd actually shoot. You're making a mistake, Frank said quietly. Mr. Jessup don't forget, and he sure as hell don't forgive. Mount up and ride. If I see you again, I won't talk first. They backed towards their horses, hands visible, movements careful. Billy scrambled into his saddle first, nearly losing his grip on the reins in his hurry. Bearded rider followed, touching his head where the bullet had come close enough to part his hair. Frank was last. He swung into the saddle with deliberate slowness, making sure Cole saw he wasn't intimidated. This ain't over. It is for tonight. We'll be back, with more men. And when we come, Cole fired again. The bullet struck the ground directly between Frank's horse's front hooves. The animal reared, nearly unseating its rider. By the time Frank got the horse under control, Cole had already chambered another round. Leave. Now. They left. Cole stood motionless, Winchester ready, and watched them disappear into the gathering darkness. He counted to 100 in his head, listening for sounds of them circling back. When he was reasonably sure they'd actually gone, he slowly lowered the rifle. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, he'd moved past fear somewhere around the count of 2, but from adrenaline dump. It had been 8 years since he'd pointed a gun at another human being. 8 years since he'd come that close to killing. The shaking got worse. Cole forced himself to breathe slowly, deliberately, in through the nose, out through the mouth. An old cavalry trick for settling nerves after combat. After a minute, the trembling subsided to something manageable. He turned toward the brush. They're gone. You can come out. Nothing. Just the quiet rush of water over stones and the evening chorus of insects. I'm alone. Not gonna hurt you. More silence. Cole lowered the Winchester completely, letting it hang loose in his right hand. They might come back. Probably will come back. If you're injured, you need help. And if you're not injured yet, you will be soon if you stay out here alone. A long pause. Then, slowly, the brush rustled. She emerged like something wild, crawling at first, too weak or too hurt to stand. Her dress was torn and filthy, her dark hair matted with blood and debris. She looked maybe 20, maybe younger, hard to tell through the damage. When she finally managed to get her feet under her and stand, Cole saw the rest. One arm hung at an odd angle, dislocated shoulder, most likely. Blood covered the left side of her face from a scalp wound. Her bare feet were cut and bleeding, and her eyes held the kind of emptiness that came from having everything taken and expecting nothing but more taking. She swayed slightly, then her knees buckled. Cole moved without thinking, catching her before she hit the ground. She weighed almost nothing, all bone and terror. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd thought. 18, maybe 19 at most. She looked up at him, and her cracked lips moved. "Please," she whispered. I can be second wife. I can work. I won't eat much. Please don't send me back." The words hit Cole harder than any bullet ever had. Second wife, as if that's what the world had taught her she was worth, as if that's what she had to offer for the basic human decency of not being dragged back to hell. Cole's throat tightened. For a moment, he couldn't speak, couldn't process what he was hearing. This girl, this broken, bleeding girl who couldn't have weighed more than 90 pounds, thought the only way to earn protection was to offer herself as property. Different property than what she'd been running from, but property nonetheless. "No," Cole managed. His voice came out rough. "No, you don't. That's not—" She must have read rejection in his face because her eyes went wide with panic. She tried to pull away despite her injuries, despite being unable to stand on her own. "Please, I'll do anything. Please don't let them take me back, please." "Stop." Cole gentled his grip but didn't let go. If he released her, she'd collapse. "Stop. I'm not sending you anywhere. And you don't have to be anything. You hear me? You're hurt. I'm going to get you somewhere safe. That's all." She stared at him like he was speaking a language she'd heard of but never learned. "Safe," she repeated, testing the word. "Safe," Cole confirmed. Then her eyes rolled back and she went completely limp in his arms. The weight of choices. Red stood where Cole had left him, well trained enough not to spook at gunfire. The gelding's ears swiveled toward Cole as he approached, carrying the unconscious girl in his arms. "Easy, boy. Just us now." Getting her into the saddle while she was unconscious took some doing. Cole ended up mounting first, then carefully lifting her up and settling her in front of him, her weight resting against his chest. Her head lolled against his shoulder. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. He needed to get her to the cabin, needed to assess her injuries properly, needed to figure out what the hell he'd just gotten himself into. But first, he had to retrieve Bess. The draft mare stood exactly where Cole had left her on the far side of the ridge, placidly grazing and completely unconcerned about the violence that had erupted in the valley. Cole transferred the girl to Bess's back. The mare's width and calm temperament made her a more stable platform, and led both horses toward home. The ride back took twice as long as it should have. Cole kept checking to make sure the girl was still breathing, still holding on. Every few minutes she'd make a small sound, a whimper or a whisper, but she didn't wake. Probably better that way. Consciousness meant pain, and she'd already endured more than enough. The cabin appeared as a darker shadow against the night-black landscape. Cole had left a lamp burning out of habit, a beacon to guide him home and a warning to any casual intruders that someone lived here. Now that light seemed inadequate for what was coming. He reined in at the small hitching post near the porch and carefully lifted the girl down from Bess's back. She stirred slightly, mumbling something incomprehensible, then went still again. The cabin door wasn't locked. Cole never locked it. What was the point when you lived 15 miles from the nearest neighbor and any determined thief could just break a window? Inside smelled like wood smoke and coffee, and the particular loneliness of a space designed for one person. Cole's belongings were sparse and organized with military precision. A table with 2 chairs. Why 2? He'd never been able to explain. A trunk containing his extra clothes and personal items. The fireplace, with cooking equipment hanging nearby. Shelves holding supplies and the books he'd read until their spines cracked. And the bed. Cole's bed, narrow, functional, made with blankets that had seen better days, suddenly felt like an invasion he was about to commit. Having an unconscious woman in his cabin, in his space, using his bed, it felt wrong on levels he couldn't quite articulate. But she needed it more than he needed his discomfort. He laid her down as gently as possible, trying not to jar her injured shoulder. She moaned softly but didn't wake. In the lamplight, the extent of her injuries became clearer and worse. The blood on her face came from a scalp wound above her left temple. Scalp wounds always bled dramatically, but this one looked fairly shallow. Probably hurt like hell and would need cleaning, but not life-threatening. The dislocated shoulder was going to be a problem. Cole had field experience setting bones and joints from his cavalry days, but that didn't make it pleasant, especially on someone who couldn't brace themselves or understand what was happening. Her feet were a mess of cuts and blisters. She'd run a long way without shoes, probably through terrain that specialized in punishing the unprepared. But it was the bruises around her wrists and the marks on her throat that made Cole's jaw clench hard enough to ache. Someone had restrained her, recently, and not gently. He forced himself to breathe slowly. Getting angry wouldn't help her, wouldn't change what had already happened. All he could do was deal with what was in front of him right now. Water first. He needed clean water. Cole had a rain barrel outside that stayed full this time of year. He grabbed his largest pot and filled it, then set it over the fire to heat. While he waited, he gathered the supplies he'd need. Clean cloth for bandages, his sewing kit for possible stitches, the bottle of whiskey he kept for occasions that required internal or external sterilization. The water heated. Cole tested it with his finger, warm enough to clean with, not hot enough to scald, and carried it to the bedside with a stack of clean rags. He started with her face. The scalp wound had mostly stopped bleeding, crusted over with dried blood and dirt. Cole worked carefully, dabbing rather than scrubbing, trying not to restart the bleeding. The girl stirred occasionally, making small sounds of discomfort, but stayed unconscious. Good. Better she stay under for what came next. He moved to her shoulder. The joint was definitely dislocated. The unnatural angle and the swelling made that obvious. Cole had reduced dislocated shoulders before, but it never got easier. The procedure required pulling the arm in a specific direction while the patient's muscles fought against the movement. With someone unconscious, you lost the ability to warn them or get them to cooperate. But leaving it dislocated would cause permanent damage. Cole positioned himself carefully, took a firm grip on her wrist and upper arm, and pulled. Her eyes flew open. She screamed. The sound cut through the cabin like a blade, raw and agonized. Her whole body went rigid, fighting against Cole's grip, but he held firm and kept pulling until he felt the joint slip back into place with a distinct pop. She went limp again, unconscious from pain. Cole's hands shook as he released her arm. His chest felt tight. He just caused her pain, necessary pain, healing pain, but pain nonetheless, and her scream would haunt his dreams, if he still allowed himself to dream. He went back to work with mechanical precision, cleaned the cuts on her feet, checked for broken bones, found none, wrapped her shoulder to immobilize it, covered her scalp wound with a bandage, used his blanket to tuck her in and keep her warm. By the time he finished, the fire had burned low and the lamp oil was running out. Cole stood looking down at the unconscious girl in his bed and tried to figure out what the hell happened next. Those men would be back. That was guaranteed. They'd said as much, and men like that didn't make threats they didn't mean to keep. $3,000 in stolen human property. The phrase made Cole's stomach turn. Whatever this girl had been before tonight, whoever owned the papers that said she belonged to someone, it didn't matter. The moment those men threatened to take her by force, the moment he'd heard that scream, the moment he'd made the choice to intervene, all of that added up to one inescapable conclusion. She was his responsibility now, and responsibility was exactly what Cole had spent 8 years avoiding. He sank into one of the chairs at his table and dropped his head into his hands. The Winchester leaned against the wall nearby, still loaded. His Colt hung in its holster from the bedpost. Outside, Red and Bess were untacked and settled in the small stable he'd built. Everything was as secure as it could be. Except nothing was secure. Not anymore. Cole's eyes drifted to the girl. In sleep, with her face cleaned of blood and dirt, she looked even younger. A kid, really. Barely old enough to be called a woman. Second wife. The words echoed in his memory. What kind of life taught someone that's what they had to offer? What kind of hell had she been running from that made indentured servitude to a stranger seem like rescue? Cole didn't want to know. Knowing meant getting involved. Involved meant caring. And caring. Caring got people killed. He'd learned that 8 years ago when he'd cared too much and too late and hadn't been fast enough to stop what couldn't be stopped. He'd learned it standing in the ashes of a farmhouse, looking at a burned wooden cross that marked where he'd buried the only person who'd ever made him believe in something beyond survival. He'd sworn, standing there in those ashes, that he'd never care about anything again, never let anyone get close enough to hurt, never be responsible for anyone except himself. And now here he was, with a bleeding stranger in his bed and 3 armed men who'd be coming back for her just as soon as they could gather reinforcements. "Damn it," Cole whispered to the empty cabin. The girl stirred, murmuring something in her sleep. Her hand clutched at the blanket like she was trying to hold on to something solid in a world that kept shifting under her. Cole watched her for a long moment. Then he stood, checked the load in his Winchester one more time, and settled into the chair by the window where he could watch the approach to his cabin. Sleep could wait. First, he needed to make sure they both lived until morning. Vigil. The night stretched long and cold. Cole sat in the darkness near the window, Winchester across his knees, and watched the landscape for movement. The moon rose late and thin, providing just enough light to turn the familiar terrain into a collection of shadows that might be rocks, or might be riders. Every hour he'd stand and walk a circuit of the cabin, checking the door, the windows, the sight lines from each position. Every 2 hours he'd step outside and scan the perimeter, listening for the sound of horses or the quiet conversation of men trying to approach undetected. Nothing. Either they weren't coming tonight, or they were better at stealth than Cole expected. Inside the cabin, the girl slept. Fitfully at first, whimpering and thrashing enough that Cole had to check several times to make sure she hadn't damaged her shoulder again. But as the night wore on, her sleep deepened into something that looked almost peaceful. Around 3 a.m, she spoke. "No, please, I'll be good. I promise I'll be good." And the words came out slurred with sleep and pain, barely audible. Cole stayed in his chair by the window, trying not to hear. Don't lock it again. I can't breathe when you lock it." Locked. Past tense. Something that had already happened to her, multiple times, enough to become part of her nightmares. Cole's hands tightened on the Winchester. "I'll work harder. I won't try again, please?" "Won't try again." "Try what? Running? Resisting? Fighting back?" "Please don't sell me to them. Please, I'll be perfect. I promise." Sold. To them. Multiple buyers, probably. Merchandise changing hands. Cole stood abruptly, unable to sit still anymore. He paced to the far side of the cabin, trying to put distance between himself and words he didn't want to hear. Words that painted a picture he didn't want to see. But you couldn't unhear truth, no matter how far you walked. Behind him, the girl whimpered once more, then fell silent. Cole forced himself to breathe, to think, to plan. Those men would be back. Maybe not tonight, but soon. They'd said something about a Mr. Jessup, who didn't forget and didn't forgive, which meant this wasn't just 3 hired guns acting independently. They worked for someone with resources and reach. Resources meant more men. Reach meant they'd keep coming, which meant Cole had 2 options: run or fight. Running made tactical sense. Take the girl, ride hard for one of the larger settlements, find a sheriff or marshal who might care about human trafficking. Turn this into someone else's problem. Except Cole had seen enough of frontier law to know how it worked when money and property claims got involved. Those men had called her stolen property. If they had papers, bill of sale, indenture contract, anything that looked official, most law enforcement would hand her over without a second thought. The law protected property rights first and human rights second, if at all. So running wouldn't work. Not really. Not unless he ran so far and so hard that Mr. Jessup couldn't follow, which would mean abandoning everything Cole had built here, this cabin, this land, 8 years of work, 8 years of isolation that had kept him breathing when breathing was all he had left. Cole's eyes drifted to the small wooden cross visible through the window, a dark shape against the slightly less dark landscape. What would she have done? The thought came unbidden, unwelcome. He tried to push it away, but it stuck. Emma would have taken the girl in without hesitation, would have cleaned her wounds and fed her and fought off anyone who tried to take her. Emma had been like that, incapable of seeing suffering without trying to fix it, even when fixing it put her in danger. Especially when fixing it put her in danger. It's what had killed her, and it's exactly what Cole had just done by interfering tonight. "I'm not her," he said quietly to the darkness. "I can't be her." The girl slept on, oblivious to Cole's crisis of conscience. The sky began to lighten in the east, that barely perceptible shift from black to charcoal that preceded real dawn by an hour. Morning birds started their songs. The temperature dropped as it always did in the hour before sunrise, pulling moisture from the air and coating everything in dew. Cole had been awake for 22 hours straight. His eyes burned. His back ached from hours in the chair. His hands felt clumsy and slow, the way they got when exhaustion started affecting coordination. He needed sleep, but sleep meant lowering his guard, and lowering his guard meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant death if those men came back sooner than expected. Cole compromised. He moved his chair directly in front of the door. Anyone coming through would have to go through him first, and let himself close his eyes. Just for a few minutes. Just until the sun came up. Morning light. Sunlight on his face woke Cole with a start. He jerked upright, hand going automatically to the Winchester that had fallen against the chair while he slept. His heart hammered as he scanned the cabin, looking for threats, trying to remember. The girl. She was sitting up in bed, watching him with dark eyes that held wariness and confusion in equal measure. Her good hand clutched the blanket to her chest. The bandage Cole had wrapped around her head had shifted slightly, showing a corner of the wound beneath. They stared at each other across the cabin. Cole cleared his throat. "How do you feel?" She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes tracked over the cabin, taking in the sparse furnishings, the organized supplies, the complete absence of anyone else. Then back to Cole. "Where?" Her voice came out as a rasp. She swallowed and tried again. "Where am I?" "My cabin, about 15 miles southwest of where I found you." Understanding flickered across her face. You're the one who..." "Yeah." "They're gone?" "For now." She absorbed that, her expression shifting through several emotions too quickly for Cole to track. Then she looked down at herself, at the clean bandages, the immobilized shoulder, her bare feet wrapped in strips of cloth. "You did this?" "Had to. Your shoulder was dislocated." Her good hand went to the bandaged shoulder, testing it carefully. "I don't remember." "You were unconscious, probably better that way." Silence settled between them. Cole stood slowly, giving her time to react if his movement scared her. When she just watched him without flinching, he crossed to the fireplace and started building up the coals from last night. "Are you hungry?" Another pause. Then, quietly, "Yes?" Cole had cornmeal and salt pork and eggs from the chickens he kept in a coop behind the cabin. Not fancy, but substantial. He mixed the cornmeal into mush, fried up the pork, and scrambled 3 eggs in the rendered fat. The girl watched him work with an expression Cole couldn't quite read. Not afraid exactly. More like she was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense. When the food was ready, Cole plated it and brought it to the bedside table. Then he retreated to the other side of the cabin, giving her space. She stared at the plate like she'd never seen food before. "It's safe," Cole said. "Not poisoned or anything." "I know." But she still didn't move to eat. Cole waited, letting her take her time. After a long moment, she reached out with her good hand and picked up the fork. Her movements were careful, almost ritualistic, like someone who'd learned that eating required permission. The first bite seemed to unlock something. She ate quickly after that, mechanically, the way people ate when they'd been hungry long enough to stop tasting. The plate was empty in less than 2 minutes. Cole watched from his position by the fireplace and tried not to think about what kind of life left someone that desperate for basic food. When she finished, she set the plate down carefully and looked at him again. "Thank you." The words were simple, but the way she said them, with surprise, as if kindness was unexpected, made Cole's chest tight. "You're welcome." More silence. Then, "What happens now?" Good question. Cole had been asking himself the same thing all night and still didn't have a good answer. "Those men," he said carefully, "the ones hunting you, they'll be back." She nodded, no surprise there. "They mentioned someone. Mr. Jessup?" All the color drained from her face. Her good hand clenched into a fist. "You know him." "He owns me." Her voice had gone flat, dead. "Or he thinks he does." "The papers they mentioned, bill of sale?" She nodded again. "I was sold when I was 12 to a family in Missouri. Worked for them for 6 years. Then the husband died and the wife sold me to Mr. Jessup to pay debts. He runs a house in Cheyenne." Cole didn't need her to elaborate. There was only one kind of house that dealt in buying and selling young women. "You ran." "I ran." She met his eyes. "I knew they'd come after me. I couldn't stay." "Not anymore." I thought if I could get far enough into the frontier, maybe they'd give up. Maybe I'd find somewhere. She trailed off. Somewhere safe, Cole finished. Stupid, right? There's nowhere safe. Not for someone like me. I'm property. The law says so. Even if I ran all the way to California, all Mr. Jessup has to do is show those papers and any marshal would hand me over. She was right. That's exactly what would happen. So what do you want? Cole asked. The question seemed to confuse her. What I want? Yeah, if you could choose anything, what would you want to happen next? She stared at him like he'd asked her to explain theoretical mathematics. Nobody's ever asked me that before. I'm asking now. Her throat worked as she swallowed. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. I want to disappear. I want to wake up tomorrow and be someone else, somewhere else, with a life that's mine. I want... She stopped, blinking rapidly. You want to be free, Cole said quietly. Free. She tested the word the same way she'd tested safe last night, like something she'd heard of but never experienced. Is that even possible? For someone like me? Cole thought about that, thought about the men who'd be coming, thought about Mr. Jessup and his papers and the weight of law that would side with property ownership over human dignity, thought about what Emma would have said. I don't know, he admitted, but we can try. Her eyes widened. We? They're coming for you, which means they're coming here, which means this became my problem the moment I decided not to let them take you. You could still turn me in. Those men, they'd probably pay you for bringing me back. $3,000, they said. I'm not turning you in. Why not? Good question. Cole didn't have a good answer, or rather he had several answers and none of them felt adequate, because he'd heard her scream and couldn't unhear it, because she'd offered herself as property to earn basic human decency and it made him sick, because 8 years ago he'd failed someone who needed protecting and he couldn't fail again, because isolation and safety were just different words for cowardice. Instead of explaining any of that, he just said, because it's wrong. She studied his face for a long moment. Then, what's your name? Cole Riker. I'm Naya. A pause. That's not my real name. I chose it when I ran. My real name belongs to them. This one is mine. Cole nodded. Understanding passed between them, the kind that didn't need words. All right, Naya. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to rest and heal. I'm going to prepare for when they come back. And when they show up, and they will show up, we're going to make sure they regret it. You can't fight them all. They'll bring more men. Probably. You'll die. Maybe. Why would you risk that? You don't even know me. Cole looked at her. This girl who'd been bought and sold and broken and still found the strength to run toward freedom even when freedom seemed impossible. Maybe I'm tired of playing it safe, he said. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was true enough. The days that followed moved with the strange duality of time under threat, simultaneously crawling and racing, each hour both endless and too short. Cole found himself caught between two imperatives that pulled against each other like opposing tides. He needed to prepare defenses, to fortify his position, and ready himself for the inevitable return of Jessup's men. But he also needed to care for Naya, whose recovery demanded attention and patience he wasn't sure he still possessed. She healed faster than he'd expected, though. The resilience of youth, maybe, or something harder, the particular toughness that came from surviving things that should have broken her. By the third morning, she could stand without swaying, could walk from the bed to the fireplace without needing support. Her shoulders still pained her. He could tell from the careful way she moved, but the worst of the damage was mending. Cole woke that morning to find her already up, standing at the window and staring out at the landscape with an intensity that suggested she was memorizing every detail. The early light painted her profile in shades of gold and shadow, highlighting the healing cuts on her face and the dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleep interrupted by nightmares. You should still be resting, Cole said quietly, not wanting to startle her. She didn't turn. I've rested enough. Need to start pulling my weight. You were half dead 4 days ago. Nobody expects you to be working yet. I expect it. Now she did turn, and her eyes held determination that reminded Cole uncomfortably of Emma. I'm not going to be dead weight while you prepare to defend this place because of me. It's not because of you. It's because I chose to get involved. Semantics. She moved away from the window, testing her balance with each step. Either way, those men are coming back and I refuse to just hide and wait. So teach me something useful or I'll figure it out myself. Cole recognized the stubborn set of her jaw. Arguing would be pointless and probably counterproductive. Better to channel that determination into something constructive. Can you shoot? He asked. Never held a gun in my life. Then that's where we start. He spent the morning teaching her the basics: how to hold a pistol, how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze the trigger instead of jerking it. She had good hands for it, steady despite the tremor of lingering shock. Her first shots went wide by yards, but by the 20th attempt she managed to hit the rough target Cole had set up against a dead tree. Better, he said. But shooting a tree is different from shooting a person. I know. Her voice went flat. I've seen what happens when people shoot each other. Seen the men Jessup hired do it to anyone who tried to run or fight back. Cole filed that information away with the growing catalog of horrors Naya had survived. If it comes to it, can you pull the trigger? Knowing what it does? She looked at him directly. If the choice is between them taking me back or me shooting them, yes, I can pull the trigger. Good. Because hesitation kills more people than bad aim. They practiced through the afternoon until Naya's hands shook from fatigue and her shoulder ached enough that she couldn't hide the wincing. Cole called a halt before she could protest and sent her inside to rest. She went reluctantly, clearly frustrated by her own limitations. While she rested, Cole worked on fortifications. His cabin had been built with defense in mind: thick walls, small windows positioned to provide good firing angles, a single reinforced door. But one man couldn't defend every approach simultaneously, and against multiple attackers working in coordination, even the best position had vulnerabilities. He reinforced the shutters on the windows, adding bars that would stop anyone from forcing entry even if they broke the glass. He positioned spare ammunition at strategic points inside the cabin, ensuring he could reload quickly no matter which direction trouble came from. He checked his weapons obsessively: the Winchester, both Colts, the scattergun, the knives he kept sharp enough to shave with. Preparation was the only control he had over what came next. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson that would have been beautiful under different circumstances, Cole heard horses approaching. His hand went to his Colt instinctively, but these weren't the cautious, predatory movements of men hunting. This was the easy, confident pace of someone who belonged on these trails. Cole relaxed fractionally when he recognized the rider. Jacob Marsh, his nearest neighbor, approaching on a sturdy bay gelding that looked like it had seen better days. Jacob was pushing 60, weathered and lean in the way frontier life made men, with a gray beard and eyes that missed nothing. "Cole?" Jacob called out as he reined in 20 yards from the cabin. Close enough to talk, far enough to be respectful. "Got a minute?" "Jacob, what brings you out this way?" The older man dismounted slowly, moving like someone whose joints complained about everything. "Heard some interesting things when I was in town yesterday. Thought I'd ride over and check if any of it was true." Cole's jaw tightened. "What'd you hear?" "That a homesteader 15 miles from nowhere killed 7 men who were hunting runaway property. That said homesteader is now harboring stolen goods worth $3,000. That there's a bounty being offered for information leading to recovery of said goods." Jacob's eyes were sharp despite the casual tone. "Any of that ring true?" Cole considered lying, considered telling Jacob he didn't know what he was talking about. But the old man had survived 40 years on the frontier by being smarter than most and harder to fool than anyone. "Most of it," Cole admitted, "though I'd quibble with the phrasing. I shot 7 men who were trying to kidnap a girl, and she's not property, stolen or otherwise. Law might see it different. Law can go to hell." Jacob studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Fair enough. The girl inside?" "Yeah, she's healing. She know they're putting up wanted posters with both your descriptions?" Cole's blood went cold. "What?" "Saw them myself yesterday. Crude drawings, but probably good enough for someone who's seen you. $500 for information leading to recovery of 1 runaway female, age approximately 18, dark hair, scarred wrists. $1,000 for the man harboring her. described as tall, gray-eyed, dangerous. They're moving faster than I thought. Man named Jessup doesn't mess around, from what I hear. Owns half of Cheyenne and most of the law enforcement. Jacob spat into the dirt. Nasty piece of work, but connected. You made yourself a powerful enemy, Cole. Didn't have much choice in the matter. There's always a choice. You could have looked the other way. No, Cole said quietly. I really couldn't. Jacob's expression softened slightly. That's what I figured. You always did have a stubborn streak about right and wrong. Emma used to joke about it. The mention of her name sent a spike of pain through Cole's chest. He and Jacob had been neighbors when Cole and Emma had the farm in Kansas. Jacob had been one of the few people who'd attended Emma's burial. Emma would have done the same thing, Cole said. She would have. And she'd have gotten herself killed for it too, stubborn woman. Jacob shook his head. Look, I didn't ride 15 miles to lecture you. Came to warn you and offer help if you need it. I can't ask you to get involved in this. You're not asking. I'm offering. That girl's not property no matter what Jessup's papers say. And any man who'd hunt another human being like an animal deserves what he gets. Jacob pulled a small cloth bundle from his saddlebag. Brought you some extra ammunition, .44 caliber for that Winchester you favor. Cole accepted the bundle, throat tight. Jacob, you don't have to. Course I don't. Doing it anyway. The old man climbed back into his saddle with a grunt. You need anything else? You send word. I'm too old to be much use in a fight anymore, but I can still shoot straight enough to make people nervous. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when this is over and you're both still breathing. Jacob gathered his reins. One more thing. Those wanted posters are going up everywhere between here and Cheyenne. You're going to have bounty hunters and opportunists coming out of the woodwork. Can't trust anyone you don't know personally. Understood. Watch yourself, Cole. And watch that girl. She's been through hell already. Make sure you don't lead her into worse. With that, Jacob turned his horse and headed back the way he'd come, disappearing into the gathering dusk like a ghost of frontier solidarity. Cole stood holding the ammunition bundle and feeling the weight of what Jacob had told him. Wanted posters. Bounties. The law itself turning against them because Jessup had the money and connections to make his version of reality the official one. The door opened behind him. Naya stepped out, wrapped in one of Cole's spare blankets against the evening chill. I heard, she said quietly, about the posters. You shouldn't be out here, it's cold. Cole, they're offering money for me, for both of us. That changes things. Doesn't change anything. We knew they'd come after you. But now it's not just Jessup's men, it's everyone. Every person who needs money badly enough to turn us in. Every bounty hunter looking for easy profit. Every lawman who thinks they're doing the right thing by enforcing property law. Her voice shook slightly. We can't fight everyone. Cole turned to face her. In the fading light, she looked fragile and fierce simultaneously, a combination that reminded him achingly of Emma. We don't have to fight everyone, just the ones who actually show up. He moved toward the cabin, gently herding her back inside where it was warmer. Jacob's right that things just got more complicated, but running won't solve it. Jessup's reach extends far enough that hiding becomes impossible. So we make our stand here, where I have the advantage. What advantage? You're one man against an entire system designed to return people like me to our owners. I'm one man who knows this land better than anyone else. Who's prepared for siege, who has nothing left to lose except you, and I'm not losing you. The words came out with more intensity than Cole intended. He softened his tone. Sorry, I just mean that we've got a better chance here than running blind and hoping we find somewhere safe before they find us. Naya studied his face in the lamplight. You really believe we can win this? I believe we can survive it. That's all anyone gets to believe on the frontier. She was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, tell me about the land, about the defensible positions you mentioned. If I'm going to hide when they come, I want to know why you're putting me wherever you put me. Cole found himself smiling despite everything. You really don't take orders well, do you? Spent 6 years taking orders I didn't want to follow. Done with that forever. Fair enough. He spread out his rough map of the property, sketches he'd made over the years marking water sources, sight lines, natural cover. Naya leaned over the table beside him, her attention focused and absolute. The cabin sits here, Cole explained, pointing. Good elevation, clear views in 3 directions. The north side is vulnerable because of the pine stand, but it's also difficult terrain for mounted approach. Anyone coming that way has to dismount and move through thick woods where I have the advantage. What about fire? If they can't take you directly, couldn't they just burn you out? Possible, but risky for them. The cabin's built from green timber that doesn't catch easy, and I've got a rain barrel positioned on the roof for exactly that scenario. Starting a fire that would actually drive me out requires getting close enough for me to shoot them. What about at night? They could approach in darkness, set multiple fires simultaneously. Cole looked at her with new appreciation. You've got good tactical instincts. I've watched men plan violence enough to understand how it works. Night approach is a risk, Cole admitted, but I've positioned tin cans with pebbles along all the approaches. Anyone moving in darkness will hit them and give themselves away. Not perfect, but better than nothing. They spent the next hour going over every detail of Cole's defensive preparations. Naya asked sharp questions and pointed out vulnerabilities Cole hadn't fully considered. Together, they refined the plan, adding contingencies and backup positions. By the time they finished, full darkness had fallen and the temperature had dropped enough that their breath misted in the cabin's air. Cole built up the fire while Naya prepared a simple dinner from their dwindling supplies. We'll need to get more food soon, she observed. What you have won't last more than a week if we're both eating. There's a supply cache about 3 miles north, hidden in a rock formation that's easy to defend if I have to get to it under fire. Enough dried goods and ammunition to last a month if necessary. You planned for siege. Planned for everything I could think of. Frontier teaches you that the difference between living and dying is usually just preparation. They ate in companionable silence, both aware that each peaceful moment might be their last for a while. The fire crackled and popped, sending shadows dancing across the cabin walls. Outside, wind whispered through the pine stand, and an owl called its hunting cry. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds. But Cole's hand never strayed far from his Colt, and Naya startled at every noise louder than usual. Tell me about your life before, Naya said suddenly. Before Emma, before the frontier. Where did you come from? Cole wasn't used to talking about himself, hadn't spoken about his past to anyone in years. But something in Naya's expression, genuine interest mixed with a need to think about something other than imminent danger, made him answer. Pennsylvania originally. Farm family, nothing special. My father was hard and my mother was harder. They didn't believe in softness or sentiment. Everything was duty and work and meeting obligations. He stared into the fire, watching memories flicker in the flames. I joined the cavalry at 18, desperate to get away. Spent 6 years riding and fighting and learning how to kill people efficiently. Is that where you learned to shoot like you do? Among other things. The cavalry taught me tactics, strategy, how to read terrain and anticipate enemy movements. Also taught me that violence leaves marks you can't see but can't escape either. What made you leave? My enlistment ended and I didn't re-up. I'd seen enough death, dealt enough death, wanted to find something quieter. His mouth twisted. Didn't work out that way. Because of Emma. Because of Emma, Cole agreed. Met her at a dance in Kansas. She was teaching school, trying to bring civilization to a part of the world that wasn't interested in being civilized. She was educated and stubborn and completely unimpressed by my cavalry service. Said violence was a failure of imagination. Was she right? Sometimes. Sometimes violence is the only language certain people understand. Emma never accepted that, though. She believed everyone could be reached if you tried hard enough. Pain laced his voice. She was wrong. Some people are just broken in ways that can't be fixed. Naya reached across the table and took his hand. Her grip was light, tentative, offering comfort without demanding anything in return. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Sorry you lost her. Sorry you had to learn that lesson. Me too. They sat in silence for a while, hands linked across the table while the fire burned low. Finally, Naya spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. Can I tell you something? Something I've never told anyone? If you want to. When I was 12 and they sold me the first time, I tried to run, made it maybe 5 miles before they caught me. The man who owned me then, he decided I needed to learn a lesson about the cost of disobedience. She swallowed hard. He locked me in a root cellar for 3 days. No light, no food, Barely any air, just darkness and the sound of rats and my own screaming until my voice gave out. Cole's hand tightened on hers. When he finally let me out, I wasn't the same person. That girl who tried to run, who believed escape was possible, she died in that cellar. What came out was someone who understood that survival meant obedience. That hope was dangerous. Naya's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I lived like that for 6 years. Being whoever they needed me to be, doing whatever kept me alive, pretending the girl in the cellar had never existed. What changed? You. She met his gaze. When those men were hunting me, and I heard your voice, heard you tell them to leave, I remembered. Remembered that girl who tried to run. Remembered that hoping for something better wasn't just stupid desperation. It was the most human thing possible. You gave her back to me, Cole. That's worth more than my life. Cole didn't know what to say. Words felt inadequate against the weight of what she'd shared. So instead he just held her hand and let the silence speak the things he couldn't articulate. Eventually Naya pulled her hand back gently. I should sleep. Tomorrow might be difficult. Probably will be. She stood and moved toward the bed, then paused. Cole? Thank you. For listening. For not treating me like I'm broken beyond repair. You're not broken. You're bent, maybe. Scarred. But not broken. Broken things can't heal, and you're healing. Her smile was small but genuine. Good night, Cole. Good night. He waited until her breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep before allowing himself to relax his vigilance even slightly. The night stretched ahead, long and full of potential threats. Cole took up his position by the window, Winchester across his knees, and began the watch he'd maintain until dawn. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Every sound outside made his hand tighten on the rifle. Every shift in the wind felt like the prelude to attack. But nothing came except the normal sounds of nighttime frontier, animals hunting, trees creaking, the distant howl of coyotes. Around 3 a.m, Naya cried out in her sleep. Cole turned from the window to see her thrashing against the blankets, caught in whatever nightmare was replaying behind her closed eyes. He crossed to the bedside and touched her shoulder gently. Naya, wake up. You're safe. She jerked awake with a gasp, eyes wild and unseen for a moment. Then recognition settled in and she sagged back against the pillow. Sorry, she whispered. The dreams. I know. I get them too. What do you dream about? Cole hesitated. Then, fire. Screaming. Emma's face as the smoke takes her, being too late to matter. I dream about the cellar and Jessup's hands and running through darkness that never ends. She shuddered. Do the dreams ever stop? I don't know. Haven't lived long enough past my trauma to find out. That's not reassuring. No, but it's honest. Naya managed a weak smile. I suppose honesty is worth something. She settled back into sleep eventually, but Cole noticed she kept one hand clenched in the blanket like she was holding onto something solid against the tide of nightmares. He returned to his watch at the window, but part of his attention remained on her, monitoring her breathing, ready to wake her if the dreams returned. The first light of dawn was beginning to gray the eastern horizon when Cole heard the sound that made his blood run cold. Horses. Multiple horses. Moving with the careful quiet of people trying not to be heard. They were here. Cole moved swiftly to Naya's bedside and shook her awake. They're coming. Get to the root cellar. Now! She came awake instantly, all traces of sleep vanishing. How many? Can't tell yet. More than 3, less than 10. Move. Naya grabbed the pistol Cole had given her and headed for the back door without argument. Cole watched through the window as she disappeared toward the root cellar, moving fast and low. Good. She'd listened during their planning sessions. Now came the hard part. Cole positioned himself at the south window with the best view of the main approach. The riders were coming from the southeast, just as he'd predicted. 6 of them, moving in loose formation designed to spread out quickly if they met resistance. These weren't the same men from before. Cole didn't recognize any of them, which meant Jessup had hired new guns. Professionals, probably. Men who knew what they were doing and wouldn't spook as easily as Frank's crew. They reined in about 100 yards out, just beyond easy rifle range. Smart. They were taking his measure, figuring out their approach. One rider dismounted and pulled something from his saddlebag. Cole's stomach sank when he saw what it was: a white flag tied to a stick. They were going to try negotiation first. The rider walked forward slowly, holding the flag high. When he got within shouting distance, he stopped. "Cole Riker," the man called out. "My name's Thomas Gray. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Jessup with an offer." Cole didn't respond. Letting them talk first gave him information. "Mr. Jessup understands there was a misunderstanding. He's willing to pay you for your trouble and let bygones be bygones. All he wants is the return of his property. Nobody has to get hurt." Still, Cole remained silent. Gray tried again. "I know you killed Frank and his men. That was unfortunate, but Mr. Jessup recognizes you were defending yourself. He bears no ill will, but he needs his property returned. It's just business, nothing personal." Cole finally spoke, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. "Tell Jessup his property is free. She's under my protection now. Any attempt to take her will end the same way it did for Frank. Be reasonable, Riker. You can't fight the law. Mr. Jessup has legitimate ownership papers. We've got a marshal riding with us who can enforce the claim legally." So they'd brought legal authority. That complicated things. "Your marshal can enforce whatever he wants," Cole called back. "But he'll have to get past me to do it, and I guarantee his badge won't stop bullets." Gray shook his head. "You're making a mistake. Last chance. Hand over the girl and we'll leave peaceful. Refuse, and we come in hard." "Then you better come hard, because I'm not handing over anyone." Gray stood there for a moment longer, then turned and walked back to the waiting riders. Cole watched them confer, heads together, clearly debating their approach. Then they spread out. 4 dismounted and began working their way forward on foot, using scattered rocks and brush for cover. 2 stayed mounted, probably ready to circle around and try the flanks. Cole let them close to 70 yards before he fired his first shot. The bullet kicked up dirt 3 feet in front of the nearest man, a warning shot that made all 4 drop flat. The mounted riders spurred their horses into motion, trying to get out of rifle range. Cole's second shot wasn't a warning. It took one of the mounted men in the shoulder, spinning him out of the saddle. The man hit the ground hard and didn't move. The other rider wheeled his horse and retreated to safety. "That's one," Cole shouted. "Who's next?" The 4 men on foot had gone to ground completely, hiding behind whatever cover they could find. Cole watched them carefully, looking for movement. His cavalry training kicked in: anticipate their tactics, stay ahead of their decisions, control the engagement. Minutes passed. Nobody moved. Then gunfire erupted from the pine stand to the north. Cole cursed. They'd sent men around while Gray was negotiating, probably 2 or 3, working through the difficult terrain to flank him while his attention was fixed south. He spun toward the north window just as bullets punched through the shutters, sending splinters flying. Cole dropped below the window line and crawled toward a better position. The assault was coordinated now. Men on the south side opened fire to keep him pinned while the northern attack pressed. Professional work. These weren't amateurs. Cole fired back through the north window, 2 quick shots to force the attackers to cover. Then he scrambled to the south window and fired 3 more times, keeping the southern group honest. But he was one man trying to defend 2 sides simultaneously. Mathematics would catch up eventually. A bullet punched through the wall 2 inches from Cole's head. Too close. They were finding the range, learning the cabin's layout with each volley. Cole reloaded and forced himself to breathe slowly. Panic killed. Panic made you stupid, and stupid got you dead. He needed to think, to find an angle they hadn't considered. The root cellar. If they breached the cabin, he could fall back to the root cellar and defend from there. Narrower approach, easier to defend, and Naya was already there. They could hold that position longer than trying to defend the entire cabin. Decision made, Cole fired 2 more shots to keep the attackers occupied, then grabbed his ammunition satchel and prepared to move. That's when he heard the scream, Naya's voice, cutting through gunfire and chaos. Not inside the root cellar where she should be. Outside, between the cabin and the cellar. Cole's blood froze. They had her. The waiting was always worse than the fighting. Cole had learned that in the cavalry, where battles came in sudden violent bursts, separated by days or weeks of tension so thick you could taste it. He'd learned it again in the years after, when every stranger on the horizon might be the one who finally tracked him down for what happened in Kansas. And he was learning it now, watching the sun arc across the sky while his muscles stayed coiled tight and his hand never strayed far from his Colt. 3 days had passed since Frank and his men rode away. 3 days of silence, broken only by wind and the ordinary sounds of frontier life. 3 days that felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the ground to give way. Naya had recovered faster than Cole expected. The resilience of youth, maybe, or the particular toughness that came from surviving things that should have broken her. Her shoulder still pained her. She moved it carefully, wincing when she forgot and reached too far. But the swelling had gone down and the bruising had started that shift from purple to yellow that meant healing. Her feet had scabbed over. The cuts on her face were closing clean. She'd gained back some color, some weight, some spark in her eyes that hadn't been there when Cole first found her. But she jumped at sudden sounds, went still and silent whenever Cole stepped outside to scan the perimeter. And every night, her sleep was broken by dreams that made her cry out in languages Cole didn't speak, and some he did. On the morning of the 4th day, Cole woke before dawn to find her already up, standing at the window and staring out at the darkness. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked quietly. She didn't startle, probably heard him moving in the loft. "I keep thinking I hear horses." "You probably do. Red and Bess move around at night." "No, different horses, ones I don't know." She turned to look at him. "They're coming today, aren't they?" Cole had been thinking the same thing. 3 days was enough time to ride to Cheyenne and back with reinforcements, enough time to gather men and weapons and whatever else Jessup thought necessary to reclaim his property. "Yeah," he said. "Probably today." Naya nodded like she'd expected that answer. "What do we do?" "We don't do anything. You stay hidden. I handle them." "There'll be too many. You said so yourself." "I've handled bad odds before." "And if you lose?" Cole pulled on his boots, taking his time with the laces. "Then you run. There's a horse already saddled in the stable, the roan mare, not Red. She's fast and she's smart. You ride north into the mountains, follow the creek upstream until you hit the old trapper's cabin about 10 miles in. Stay there for 3 days. If I don't come for you by then, keep going north. Don't stop until you hit Montana." "I don't know how to get to Montana." "Follow the North Star. Ask directions when you're far enough away that nobody's looking for you. Make up a story about being a widow heading to family. People help widows." Naya was quiet for a moment, then, "You've thought about this a lot." "I've thought about everything a lot. That's how you stay alive." "What about you staying alive?" Cole finished with his boots and stood, checking the loads in his Colt and Winchester out of habit. "I'm hard to kill. Been trying for years and it hasn't taken yet." She didn't smile at the dark humor. "I don't want you to die because of me. Won't be because of you. Be because I chose to stand between you and them. My choice. My consequences." "That's a stupid philosophy." "Probably." Cole crossed to the fireplace and started building up the fire. Coffee first, then breakfast, then whatever came next. "But it's the one I've got." Naya watched him work for a few moments, then moved to help despite her injured shoulder. They'd developed a rhythm over the past 3 days, an unspoken division of labor that acknowledged her limitations while respecting her need to contribute. She couldn't lift heavy things or use her left arm much, but she could measure coffee grounds and slice bread and do 100 small tasks that made the cabin feel less like a bachelor's cave and more like a place where humans lived. Cole wasn't sure how he felt about that change. They ate in comfortable silence as the sun rose, painting the eastern sky in shades of gold and crimson that promised a clear day. Good weather for riding, good weather for hunting, good weather for dying. "Tell me about the terrain," Naya said suddenly. "If they're coming, where will they come from?" Cole looked at her with new assessment. "Why?" "Because if I'm going to hide, I want to hide somewhere useful, somewhere I can see what's happening, and because—" She hesitated. "Because I've spent 6 years being helpless. I'd like to stop if I can." There was steel in her voice that hadn't been there 3 days ago. Or maybe it had always been there, buried under layers of trauma and fear, and was only now surfacing. Cole considered. Then he stood and moved to the window, gesturing for her to join him. "Cabin sits here, at the base of this small rise. Good sight lines in 3 directions, east, south, west. North is blocked by the hill and the pine stand. Most likely approach is from the southeast, following the trail I use to access my land. It's the clearest path and the most obvious. So they won't use it. Smart girl. No, they'll probably split up. Maybe send one or two along the main trail as a distraction while the main force comes from a different direction. If I was planning it, I'd swing wide to the west, approach from the sun so we're squinting into the light, hit fast before anyone inside has time to prepare. How many do you think will come? Frank had 2 men with him when they found you. He'll want more this time, probably 6 to 8 total. Enough to be sure, not so many they can't move quiet. Naya's jaw tightened. 8 against 1. 8 against 1 who knows the terrain, has good cover, and isn't planning to play fair. Cole met her eyes. I don't need to beat them all, Naya. I just need to make it cost more than you're worth to them. I'm worth $3,000. Money can be earned, lives can't be replaced. Make it expensive enough and they'll cut their losses. You don't believe that? No, he didn't. Men like Jessup didn't build empires by cutting losses when things got difficult. They built them by making examples of anyone who defied them. But Naya didn't need to hear that. Maybe not, Cole admitted, but it's the play we've got, so we work it. Now come on. I need to show you where you're going to hide. The root cellar sat 50 yards behind the cabin, built into the hillside and covered with earth and sod, so it looked like a natural rise. Cole had constructed it his first year here, needing somewhere to store vegetables and meat through the brutal Wyoming winters. It was dark and cool and completely invisible unless you knew where to look. He'd also, with the paranoia born of hard experience, built a second entrance. The tunnel was narrow and ran about 20 feet, emerging in a thick stand of scrub oak that provided natural concealment. Cole had cut the exit to be barely large enough for a person to squeeze through, and he'd positioned it so the opening faced away from the cabin. If things go bad, he told Naya, showing her the tunnel's entrance inside the root cellar, you go through here. The roan is tied just past the oak stand. Don't wait to see what happens. Don't try to help. Just run. Naya crouched at the tunnel entrance, testing its width. What if you need help? I won't. What if you do? Cole didn't answer. They both knew what happened if things went so wrong that Cole needed help from an injured girl with no combat experience. How will I know when to run? Naya asked quietly. When it gets quiet. If the shooting stops and I don't come for you within 10 minutes, you assume the worst and go. 10 minutes isn't very long. It's long enough to determine an outcome. Trust me on that. She nodded slowly, committing the instructions to memory. Then she looked up at him. Cole, thank you for everything. If this is the last chance I get to say it, it won't be. But if it is, thank you. Cole felt something twist in his chest. He reached out and squeezed her good shoulder gently. You're welcome. Now, let's get you settled before... Red's warning whinny cut through the morning air. Cole's hand went to his Colt in pure reflex. He moved to the cellar entrance and scanned the visible landscape. Nothing yet. But Red had excellent instincts about approaching riders. They're here, Cole said quietly. Get in the cellar. Stay quiet no matter what you hear. And Naya? He looked back at her. If I tell you to run, you run. No arguments. Understood? She nodded, her face pale but composed. Cole waited until she'd climbed down into the cellar before pulling the hidden door closed. From the outside, it looked like just another section of hillside. Perfect. He moved quickly back toward the cabin, his mind already shifting into the cold calculation of combat. 8 men, probably. Multiple approaches. Superior numbers but inferior position. The key was not letting them use those numbers effectively. Cole reached the cabin and grabbed his Winchester. He'd prepared for this over the past 3 days, positioned ammunition at strategic points, identified firing positions, mapped fallback routes. Now it was just a matter of execution. And survival. Always survival. He took up position at the south-facing window, the one with the best view of the most likely approach. The Winchester rested on the sill, steady and ready. His breathing slowed deliberately. His heartbeat settled into the familiar pre-combat rhythm. Then he waited. Minutes crawled past. Red whinnied again, more insistent. The chickens in their coop went silent. They always knew when predators approached. Movement caught Cole's eye. There. 3 riders approaching from the southeast along the main trail, just as he'd predicted. They rode slowly, confidently, making no attempt at stealth. the distraction, which meant the real threat was coming from somewhere else. Cole's eyes flicked to the western approach. Nothing yet, but they'd be there, probably waiting for the distraction to draw his attention before making their move. The three riders on the main trail reined to a halt about 200 yards out. One of them, Frank, Cole recognized even at this distance, raised a hand in a mockery of friendly greeting. "Riker!" Frank's voice carried across the open ground. "We need to talk." Cole didn't respond. Talking was a tactic, designed to fix his position and keep him occupied while the main force maneuvered. "I know you're in there, and I know you've got something that belongs to Mr. Jessup. We're here to take her back peaceable-like. No need for anyone to get hurt." Still, Cole remained silent, his eyes scanning the western approach. There. 4 riders emerging from behind the low rise, moving fast and low in their saddles. Professional. Experienced. These weren't cowboys playing at violence. These were men who'd done this before. Frank's voice continued its reasonable pitch. "Mr. Jessup's a reasonable man. He's willing to forget your interference if you just hand over the girl. Hell, he might even pay you for the trouble of keeping her safe. What do you say?" The Western riders had closed to within 100 yards. Any second now, they'd make their final rush. Cole made his choice. Instead of defending the cabin, he went out the back door. The move was counterintuitive enough that it bought him precious seconds. He'd left his hat on the windowsill to suggest someone still watched from inside. The 4 riders approaching from the west had their attention fixed on the cabin's front entrance. They never saw Cole emerge from the back and sprint toward the pine stand on the northern hill. He reached cover just as one of the western riders glanced back and shouted a warning. Too late. Cole was already in position, Winchester up, target acquired. His first shot took the lead rider in the chest. The man tumbled from his saddle without a sound, dead before he hit the ground. His horse bolted, adding to the chaos. Cole's second shot missed. The remaining 3 riders scattered in different directions, denying him easy targets. But he'd achieved his primary objective, broken their formation and seized initiative. Frank's voice from the main trail changed pitch, losing its reasonable tone. "Get him! He's in the pines! Circle around!" The 3 riders from the main trail spurred their horses into motion, splitting to flank the hill. Smart. They were trying to pin Cole between 2 groups. But Cole was already moving. He abandoned his position and sprinted deeper into the pine stand, using the trees for cover as bullets started tearing through branches where he'd been moments before. His breath came hard and controlled. His mind tracked the positions of all 6 remaining riders, 3 from the west regrouping, 3 from the trail circling. The terrain favored him here. The pine stand was thick enough to prevent easy riding and full of deadfall that made quiet movement impossible. Cole knew every rock and tree. His pursuers didn't. He dropped behind a fallen log and risked a quick look. 2 riders had dismounted and were advancing on foot, using the trees for cover. The smart play. Cole aimed carefully and fired. His bullet caught one man in the shoulder, spinning him around. Not fatal, but definitely out of the fight. The wounded man screamed and went down, clutching his arm. His companion fired back 3 rapid shots that came close enough to spray bark into Cole's face. Cole ducked and rolled left, coming up in a new position. He fired twice more. 1 shot to keep the standing rider honest. 1 toward the sound of movement on his right flank. Someone cursed. A hit, but Cole couldn't tell how good. "He's alone," Frank's voice closer now. 7 of us and 1 of him. Spread out and flush him. Cole smiled grimly. Frank had just confirmed the count. 7. 1 dead, 1 wounded, 7 still fighting. Better odds than he'd feared, still terrible odds. But manageable if he kept moving and didn't let them coordinate. He worked his way uphill through the pines, moving fast and quiet. Behind him, he could hear the pursuers crashing through undergrowth, trying to maintain contact. They were making too much noise, sacrificing stealth for speed. Mistake. Cole reached a small, rocky outcrop that gave him elevation and a clear firing position. He settled in, controlled his breathing, and waited. 30 seconds later, 2 men appeared below, working their way uphill. Cole recognized the bearded rider from the first encounter. Apparently, he'd decided to come back for round 2. Cole sighted carefully and squeezed the trigger. The bearded man went down hard, grabbing his leg and howling. His companion threw himself behind a tree, firing blindly upward. The bullets went wide, panicked shooting. Cole fired once more, forcing the man to stay pinned, then abandoned his position. They'd have his location now. Time to move again. He angled west, toward where he'd heard movement earlier. If his mental map was right, the three riders from the western approach should be somewhere in this direction, probably trying to circle around behind him. A branch snapped to his left. Cole spun and fired from the hip, pure reflex. A man he didn't recognize staggered backward, blood spreading across his shirt. The man's rifle clattered against the rocks as he fell. 2 down permanently. 2 wounded badly enough to be out of the fight. 4 still active. Cole's Winchester clicked empty. He dropped behind cover and reloaded with practiced speed, thumbing fresh cartridges into the magazine while his eyes scanned for threats. 15 seconds to reload. Forever in a firefight. A bullet struck the rock above his head, showering him with stone chips. Cole finished loading and rolled right, coming up in time to see Frank advancing with 2 other men, a pincer movement designed to catch him between firing positions. He fired 3 times in rapid succession. 1 shot missed. 1 hit Frank in the side, staggering him. The 3rd caught one of Frank's companions in the throat. The man dropped like a puppet with cut strings, drowning in his own blood. Frank stumbled backward, clutching his bleeding side. His face twisted in pain and rage. "Kill him! Kill that son of a bitch!" But the enthusiasm had gone out of the attack. Cole could see it in the way the remaining men moved, slower, more cautious, the confidence of superior numbers eroded by watching their friends die. 4 down, 4 left, including Frank, who was wounded. Cole kept moving, kept pressing, denying them time to regroup or coordinate. He fired whenever he had a clear shot, keeping them scattered and reactive. Another man went down screaming, shot through the shoulder. 3 left. Then 2, when someone decided they weren't being paid enough for this and simply ran, crashing through the underbrush toward where they'd left their horses. Frank and 1 other man remained. Cole found them pinned behind a cluster of boulders, Frank's face pale from blood loss. The other man, young Billy from the first encounter, looking like he desperately wanted to follow his companion's example and flee. "Give it up, Frank," Cole called out. "You've lost." "The hell I have?" Frank's voice was weaker now, pain stealing its strength. "Mr. Jessup don't accept failure. We either bring back the girl or we don't come back at all." "Then I guess you're not going back." Cole had worked around to a position where he could see both men clearly. His Winchester was steady, trained on the gap between the boulders. 1 shot, maybe 2, and this would be over. But something made him hesitate. Maybe the memory of Emma, who'd always argued for mercy when possible. Maybe his own exhaustion with killing. Maybe just the look on young Billy's face. Pure terror. A kid in over his head who'd made bad choices and was about to pay the final price. "Billy," Cole said quietly, "you don't have to die here. Get on your horse and ride away. I won't stop you." Billy looked at Frank, then back toward Cole's voice. "Mr. Jessup." "Jessup's not here. I am. And I'm giving you a chance to walk away. Take it." "You run, you little coward, and I'll hunt you myself," Frank snarled. "You're not hunting anyone," Cole said. "You're bleeding out. In about 10 minutes, you'll be dead or unconscious. Billy, last chance. Leave now or stay forever." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Billy bolted. He ran like hell was chasing him, stumbling over rocks and roots in his panic to escape. Cole tracked him with the Winchester but didn't fire. The kid crashed through the pines, found his horse, and rode off like demons were on his heels. That left Frank. Cole approached the boulders carefully, weapon ready. Frank had his pistol out, but his hands were shaking too badly to aim. Blood soaked his shirt and pooled beneath him. "You're dying," Cole said simply. "I know." Frank's laugh came out wet and pained. "Gut shot. Seen enough men die this way to recognize it." "I can make it quick if you want." Frank looked up at him with eyes that held surprised respect. "You'd do that? After I tried to kill you?" "You're beaten. Suffering serves no purpose. Mercy from a man who just killed 5 of my friends. That's rich." Frank coughed, spattering blood on the rocks. "You know Jessup won't stop, right? He'll send more men, better men. He'll keep sending them until he gets her back or you're dead. Let him. That's your plan? Kill everyone he sends until he runs out of hired guns?" "If necessary." Frank shook his head slowly. "You're crazier than I thought, or you care about that girl more than makes sense." He coughed again, worse this time. Do me a favor? What? Tell Billy I don't blame him for running. Kid's got family. No reason he should die for Jessup's pride. Cole nodded. All right. And when Jessup's next crew comes, and they will come, you remember this. Jessup don't just own whorehouses. He owns sheriffs, judges, politicians. You can't win against that kind of power. Best thing you can do is take the girl and run so far Jessup can't find you. Thanks for the advice. Frank's laugh turned into a gurgling rasp. Stubborn bastard. All right then. If you're offering mercy, I'll take it. Been shot enough times to know this ain't a good way to go. Cole raised his Colt. One question first, Frank said. Why? Why risk everything for some girl you don't even know? Cole thought about that. About Emma and the farmhouse and 8 years of isolation. About the moment he'd heard Naya scream and made the choice that brought him to this pine grove with a dying man at his feet. Because someone has to, he said finally. Frank smiled faintly. Fair enough. Cole pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the pines, then faded into silence. Cole stood over Frank's body for a moment, then turned and walked away. Behind him, the dead lay where they'd fallen, testimony to the price of hunting human beings. 5 dead. 2 wounded badly enough they probably wouldn't survive without medical attention. 1 fled and likely wouldn't return. Only Billy had escaped relatively intact, and Cole doubted the kid would ever work for Jessup again. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it just felt like more weight added to a burden Cole already carried. He made his way back toward the cabin, checking each fallen man as he passed. Looking for signs of life, finding none that mattered. The 2 wounded men had either died while he finished Frank, or would die soon. Gut shots and severed arteries didn't leave much hope on the frontier. The landscape that had been alive with gunfire 10 minutes ago now lay quiet and still. Smoke from discharged weapons drifted through the pines. The smell of blood and cordite hung heavy in the air. Cole's hand shook as he reloaded his weapons. Not from fear. Not anymore. From the aftermath, the crash that came when combat adrenaline burned off and left exhaustion in its wake. He'd been running on instinct and training for the past 20 minutes. Now his body was demanding payment for that expenditure. He forced himself to keep moving. Naya would be terrified in the root cellar, listening to the gunfire and not knowing who'd won. He needed to get to her quickly. The walk back to the cabin felt like it took hours instead of minutes. Cole's legs seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds each. His lungs burned, his ears rang from gunfire in enclosed spaces. But he made it. The cabin stood undamaged. They'd never gotten close enough to threaten it. Red and Bess stood in the corral, nervous but unharmed. The chickens had started making noise again, their brief silence forgotten. Everything looked exactly as it had before the shooting started, except for the bodies scattered through the pines, except for the blood on Cole's hands and clothes, except for the line he'd just crossed, moving from isolated hermit to active combatant in someone else's war. Cole walked to the root cellar and knocked 3 times, the signal he'd arranged with Naya. "It's over," he called down. "You can come out." Silence. Then the sound of movement below. The cellar door lifted and Naya emerged, pale and shaking but unharmed. She took one look at Cole, covered in blood and gunpowder residue, Winchester still in his hands, and her eyes went wide. "You're hurt." "Not my blood." Cole's voice came out flat and tired. "Theirs." "How many?" "All of them. The ones that didn't run anyway." Naya swayed slightly. Cole caught her elbow, steadying her. "It's done," he said. "For now." "For now," she echoed. Then with more strength, "Frank said Jessup would send more. He wasn't lying, was he?" "No." "So this isn't over?" "No," Cole agreed. "This is just the beginning." They stood together in the afternoon sunlight, looking at the peaceful landscape that hid so much violence beneath its surface. Somewhere in the pines, men lay dead because they'd chosen the wrong employer and the wrong quarry. Somewhere in Cheyenne, Jessup would learn that his hunters had failed and would plan his response. And here, at a small cabin 15 miles from anywhere, 2 people who barely knew each other tried to figure out how to survive what came next. "We should bury them," Naya said quietly. Cole looked at her in surprise. "Why?" "Because leaving them for scavengers is wrong. Even if they were hunting me. Even if they would have, she swallowed. They were still human. Cole thought about arguing, thought about pointing out that these men had forfeited their humanity when they started trading in human lives. Thought about saying that burying enemies was a luxury they couldn't afford when more enemies were certainly coming. But Emma would have agreed with Naya. Emma had believed that maintaining your own humanity mattered more than punishing others for losing theirs. All right, Cole said finally. We'll bury them, but it'll take time, and we don't have much of that. Then we work fast. They did. It took the rest of the afternoon and into the evening to dig graves for 5 men. Shallow graves, barely deep enough to keep scavengers away, but graves nonetheless. Cole did most of the digging while Naya gathered stones to mark each site. Neither of them spoke much during the work. What was there to say? They were burying men who died trying to drag Naya back to hell. Sympathy seemed inappropriate. Celebration seemed wrong. So they worked in silence, paying the debt the dead demanded by simple virtue of having once been alive. By the time they finished, the sun had set and stars were beginning to appear. Cole's back ached from digging. His hands were blistered despite years of calluses. His entire body felt like one massive bruise. But the dead were buried. Naya stood looking at the graves, her face unreadable in the twilight. Do you think they had families? Probably. Someone who will miss them? Maybe. Does that make this worse or better? Cole didn't have an answer for that. He just stood beside her, 2 people marked by violence trying to find meaning in its aftermath. Finally, Naya turned away from the graves. We should go inside. Plan what comes next. Yeah. They walked back to the cabin together, leaving the dead behind in the Wyoming earth. Tomorrow they'd have to deal with the wounded men's horses, the weapons scattered through the pines, the evidence of battle that anyone with eyes could read. Tomorrow they'd have to prepare for Jessup's response. Tomorrow they'd have to decide whether to run or make their stand. But tonight, they were alive. And sometimes on the frontier, that was victory enough. Inside the cabin, Cole lit the lamp with hands that had finally stopped shaking. The familiar yellow glow pushed back the darkness, creating a circle of warmth that felt fragile against everything waiting outside. Naya moved to the fireplace and started building up the coals without being asked, her movements careful around her healing shoulder but growing more confident each day. They'd developed routines in the week since the battle, small domestic patterns that arose naturally when 2 people shared space under the constant weight of threat. Cole would check the perimeter while Naya prepared coffee. She'd handle the cooking while he maintained weapons. They'd sit together in the evenings, not talking much, but the silence between them had shifted from awkward to comfortable. Tonight felt different. Tonight the silence held questions neither of them had voiced yet, but both knew needed answering. Cole pulled off his blood-stained shirt and dropped it in the corner for burning later. He'd learned long ago that some stains didn't wash out, and trying just made you remember what caused them every time you wore the garment. Better to destroy the evidence and move forward. Naya glanced at him, then quickly away. Even after a week of close quarters, there was still careful propriety between them, lines they didn't cross. You should clean those cuts, she said, focusing on the coffee pot. Cole looked down at himself. He had scratches from diving through pine branches, a deep scrape on his forearm from hitting rock, and what would probably be spectacular bruises by morning. Nothing serious compared to what could have happened. They're fine. They'll get infected if you don't clean them. Naya, please. She turned to face him, and her expression was fierce. You just fought 7 men to protect me. The least you can do is let me help with the aftermath. Put that way, refusing seemed churlish. Cole sat while Naya retrieved his medical supplies, the same ones he'd used on her a week ago. She worked with surprising competence, cleaning each wound with steady hands despite the tremor Cole could see she was suppressing. You've done this before, he observed. Had to patch myself up plenty of times when there was nobody else to do it. Her voice was matter-of-fact, but the words carried weight. Years of weight. And sometimes the other girls, when things got bad. Cole filed that information away with all the other fragments she'd shared. Pieces of a story he was beginning to understand without her having to explain the worst parts. There, Naya said, tying off the last bandage. Now you won't die of blood poisoning. Thanks. She cleaned up the supplies, her back to him. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet. What Frank said about Jessup sending more men. How long do we have? Hard to say. Billy will report back, assuming he makes it to Cheyenne without falling off his horse in panic. Call it 2 days for the round trip. Then Jessup has to decide his response. Could be 3 days, could be a week. But he will respond. Yeah, men like Jessup don't accept defiance. It's bad for business. Naya turned to face him. Then we need to leave. Take the horses and go. Tonight, if possible. Cole had been expecting this conversation, had been running the scenarios in his head all afternoon while digging graves. Running changed the equation but didn't eliminate the problem. Where would we go? Anywhere. Montana, like you said, or California, or Mexico. Somewhere far enough that Jessup can't reach. Jessup's reach is longer than you think. Men with his kind of money and connections, they can find people anywhere if they want to badly enough. And running makes you visible. Every town you pass through, every person you ask for directions, every time you need supplies, all of it creates a trail. So we just stay here and wait for him to kill you? I didn't say that. Naya crossed her arms, frustration evident in every line of her body. Then what are you saying? Because from where I'm standing, our options are run or die. And you're saying running won't work, so that leaves... We make sure he doesn't want to send anyone else, Cole interrupted. She stared at him. How? By making it clear that hunting you costs more than you're worth. Today was a message. 5 men dead, 2 more wounded so bad they probably died on the trail. That's a hell of a price for one escaped girl. You killed 7 of Jessup's men, and you think that'll make him back off? Naya's laugh held no humor. Cole, you don't know him. You don't know what he's like. That won't scare him off. It'll make him angry. And when Jessup gets angry, people die. Slowly. Cole met her eyes steadily. Then we make him more than angry. We make him afraid. How do you make a man like Jessup afraid? By threatening what he actually cares about. His reputation, his business, his belief that he's untouchable. Cole stood and crossed to his trunk, pulling out a leather-bound journal he'd kept during his cavalry days. Maps and notes from old campaigns. Jessup runs whorehouses, you said. That means buildings, inventory, money flow, all things that can be disrupted. Naya's eyes widened. You want to attack him? In Cheyenne? I want him to understand that you're under protection, that pursuing you comes with consequences he can't afford. Right now he thinks he's hunting a runaway slave and some random homesteader who got stupid. We changed that calculation. We? I, Cole corrected. You stay here, stay safe. The hell I do. Naya's voice turned sharp. You think I'm going to hide in a root cellar while you ride into Cheyenne and get yourself killed for me? Better than both of us getting killed. Cole. She moved closer, and there was steel in her voice that reminded him why she'd survived 6 years of hell. I am not property. I am not some fragile thing that needs protecting while men decide my fate. I've spent my entire life being helpless. I'm done with that. If we're going to do this, and it's a crazy, stupid, suicidal plan, then we do it together. Cole wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the ways she was wrong, all the tactical reasons why bringing her along was a terrible idea. But the look in her eyes stopped him. He recognized that look. Emma had worn it the day she'd insisted on coming with him to confront the raiders who'd been terrorizing homesteaders. She'd been terrified but determined, unwilling to let fear dictate her choices. And Cole had loved her more in that moment than he'd thought possible. The memory hurt like a fresh wound. All right, he said finally, together. But we do this smart. Planned. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. Agreed. Naya's shoulders relaxed slightly. So what's the plan? Cole spread his old cavalry maps on the table. They were outdated, but the basic geography of Cheyenne hadn't changed much. He'd been there twice in the past 8 years, buying supplies and avoiding human contact as much as possible. But he'd paid attention. Old habits. Jessup runs 3 establishments in Cheyenne, 2 saloons with rooms upstairs, 1 dedicated brothel on the edge of town. All his money flows through the brothel. It's where he keeps his records, his safe, his control over the whole operation. How do you know that? Because that's how men like him always operate. Centralizing control makes it easier to manage, easier to protect. It's also a vulnerability if someone gets inside. Naya studied the map. You're not talking about robbing him. No. Robbery would just make him angry. I'm talking about destroying his records, his contracts, his bills of sale, his ledgers showing who owes him what and who he owns. Without documentation, his whole empire gets shaky. And my sale papers would be in those records. Almost certainly. Understanding dawned on Naya's face. If those papers burn, I'm not legally his property anymore. You were never his property, Cole said quietly. But yeah, destroying the documentation makes it a lot harder for him to pursue legal remedies, and hits him where it hurts, his money and his control. This is insane. Completely. We could both die. Probably will. Naya looked at the map, then at Cole, then back at the map. When do we leave? Tomorrow night. Gives us a day to prepare, to rest. We ride hard. We can reach Cheyenne in 2 days. Do what needs doing and be gone before anyone knows we were there. What about the cabin? Your land? Cole glanced around the small space that had been his sanctuary for 8 years. Every board and nail represented hours of work. Every item carefully chosen and maintained. This was the life he'd built from nothing, the isolation he'd needed to survive after Emma. And he was about to abandon it, possibly permanently, for a girl he'd known less than 2 weeks. The crazy thing was, he didn't hesitate. It's just a place, he said. I can build another cabin. Can't replace a life. Naya's eyes shone with something that might have been tears, but she blinked them back. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We haven't survived this stupidity. Still, thank you for seeing me as a person worth saving. Cole didn't know how to respond to that, so he focused on the practical. They spent the next hour planning, route to Cheyenne, timing, what supplies they'd need, contingencies if things went wrong. Cole's cavalry training served him well. He'd led small unit operations before, raids behind enemy lines where success meant speed and precision. Of course, those operations had usually ended with people dying. He tried not to think about that too hard. Around midnight, exhaustion finally caught up with both of them. Cole insisted Naya take the bed as always. Her shoulder still needed proper rest. He made himself comfortable on the floor near the fireplace, his Winchester within easy reach. Cole? Naya's voice came soft from the darkness. Yeah? Why did you really help me? The truth this time. Cole stared at the ceiling, watching shadows dance in the firelight. He could give her the easy answer, the one about right and wrong, about basic human decency. But she'd asked for truth. 8 years ago, he said slowly, I was married. Her name was Emma. We had a farm in Kansas, nothing fancy, but it was ours. She was the best person I've ever known, kind and fierce and completely unable to ignore suffering. He paused, gathering the words he'd never spoken aloud to anyone. Raiders came through our area, outlaws preying on isolated homesteads. Emma wanted to warn the neighbors, wanted to organize resistance. I said it wasn't our problem, said getting involved would just make us targets. We fought about it. His voice roughened. She went anyway while I was checking fence line. I came back to find the farm burning and Emma dead. The raiders had hit our place first because she'd been going around organizing people against them. Naya was silent, letting him finish. I hunted them down. All of them. Took me 6 months, but I made sure every man who touched her paid for it. Then I came here and built walls so high nothing could get through. Told myself I'd never care about anything again because caring got people killed. But you saved me anyway. Yeah, because when I heard you scream, all I could hear was Emma, and I couldn't walk away again. Couldn't be the man who stood aside while someone suffered because he was too afraid to get involved. You're not that man, Cole. That man wouldn't have faced 7 armed riders alone. Maybe? Or maybe I'm just trying to fix something that can't be fixed by saving someone Emma would have saved without hesitation. Does it matter? The reason, I mean, you still saved me. Cole thought about that. No, I guess it doesn't matter. The result's the same either way. For what it's worth, Naya said quietly, I think Emma would be proud of you for choosing to help despite your fear. That takes more courage than helping when you're not afraid. Cole's throat tightened. He couldn't speak for a moment, couldn't trust his voice not to break. Get some sleep, he managed finally. Long day ahead tomorrow. You too. But Cole lay awake long after Naya's breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep. His mind churned through plans and contingencies, trying to find the angle that would let them both survive what came next. trying to quiet the voice that whispered he was about to get another person killed through his own stubborn refusal to be sensible. The voice sounded a lot like his own. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters and carrying the scent of rain. A storm was coming. Maybe by tomorrow, maybe the day after. The weather might work for them, or against them depending on timing. Cole added it to the list of variables he couldn't control. Around 3 in the morning, he finally drifted into uneasy sleep. His dreams were full of fire and screaming and Emma's face disappearing into smoke. He woke twice, hand on his Colt, before exhaustion dragged him back under. When dawn finally broke, Cole woke to find Naya already up, coffee made, breakfast cooking. She moved through the cabin like she belonged there, like this was home and not temporary shelter before the next crisis. "You didn't sleep much either," she observed without looking at him. "How'd you know?" "You talk in your sleep, not words, just sounds, like you're fighting something." Cole scrubbed a hand over his face. "Sorry if I woke you." "You didn't, I was already awake." She poured coffee and handed him a cup. "Thinking about how insane this plan is?" "And?" "Still insane. Still doing it." She smiled faintly. Turns out desperation and stupidity look pretty similar from the inside. They ate breakfast in companionable silence, both of them acutely aware this might be their last peaceful morning. After eating, Cole began the work of preparing for the journey. He selected the best weapons, cleaned and loaded them meticulously, packed ammunition, water, jerky, hardtack, enough for several days on the trail. Naya worked alongside him, her contributions growing more confident as the day progressed. She'd learned to handle a pistol over the past week, and while she wasn't a great shot, she could hit a target at close range. Better than nothing. "Tell me about Cheyenne," Cole said as they worked. "The layout, what you remember." Naya's face tightened, but she answered. "Jessup's main brothel is on the eastern edge of town. 2-story building, painted red, hard to miss. There's usually 2 guards outside at night, more inside. The rooms are upstairs, the business office is downstairs in the back. Guards armed? Always. Shotguns mostly. Some pistols. How many girls? When I was there? 12. Could be more now, could be less. Jessup cycles them through, sells them off when they age out or get too damaged to work." The clinical way she described it made Cole's hands tighten on the rifle he was cleaning. "Security inside? 1 guard on the stairs, 1 roaming the ground floor. Jessup himself is usually there until midnight. Then he goes home. After that, it's just the guards and whatever customers are still around. Best time to hit it would be late, after Jessup leaves, before the morning shift changes." "Around 2 in the morning, Naya agreed. "Least number of guards, most of them half drunk or asleep." "You're sure you want to do this?" Cole asked. "Going back there, even for a few minutes." "I'm sure." Her voice was iron. "I need to see those papers burn. Need to know I'm free. Really free." Cole nodded. He understood that need better than she probably realized. They worked through the afternoon, preparing gear and planning the raid with military precision. Cole's cavalry experience proved invaluable. He'd conducted enough night operations to know what worked and what got people killed. Speed was crucial. Get in, find the office, burn the records, get out. No heroics, no deviations from the plan. Violence only if absolutely necessary. It was a good plan. Cole just wished he believed it would actually work that way. As the sun set on their last evening at the cabin, Cole found himself standing at the eastern edge of his property, looking at the small wooden cross he'd carved for Emma. He hadn't visited it in months. The sight still hurt too much. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt like goodbye. "I hope you'd understand," he said quietly to the fading light. "Why I'm doing this. Why I'm risking everything again." The wind whispered through the grass, carrying no answers. "I know what you'd say. That helping people is never the wrong choice, even when it costs everything. That isolation isn't safety, it's just slow death. You were right about that. About all of it." He knelt and touched the weathered wood. "I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. Sorry I let fear make me a coward. I can't fix that. Can't change what happened. But maybe," his voice caught, "maybe I can make sure someone else doesn't die because I was too afraid to act." The cross stood silent, marking earth that held bones and memories and everything Cole had lost. "I'm probably going to die doing this," he admitted. "Odds aren't good, but if I do, at least it'll be for something that matters. That has to count for something, right?" Still no answer. just wind and grass and the gathering darkness. Cole stood slowly, his knees creaking. Goodbye, Emma. If I don't make it back, I hope wherever you are, you know I tried. I finally tried. He turned and walked back toward the cabin, leaving the past behind him. Naya was waiting on the porch, 2 horses saddled and ready. She'd packed their gear with impressive efficiency, everything they needed and nothing they didn't. Red and the roan mare stood patient, sensing the tension but calm under experienced handling. Ready? Naya asked. Cole looked at the cabin one last time. 8 years of his life contained in rough timber and stone. 8 years of safety purchased through isolation. 8 years of survival that had felt more like slow drowning. Yeah, he said. I'm ready. They mounted up as full darkness fell. Cole led the way, following trails he knew by heart, even in the dark. Behind him, Naya rode with growing confidence, her seat in the saddle improving each day as her shoulder healed. The journey to Cheyenne would take 2 days of hard riding. 2 days to prepare mentally for what came next. 2 days to doubt and second guess and wonder if they were both insane. But as they rode through the night, with stars wheeling overhead and the horses' hooves beating a steady rhythm against the earth, Cole felt something he hadn't felt in 8 years. Purpose. Not the grim satisfaction of revenge he'd felt hunting Emma's killers. Not the numb routine of survival he'd maintained at the cabin. But actual purpose. The sense that what he was doing mattered beyond his own pain and fear. It terrified him. But it also made him feel alive in a way he'd forgotten was possible. Behind him, Naya began to hum quietly. A tune Cole didn't recognize. Probably something from before Jessup, from whatever life she'd had before everything went wrong. The sound was fragile and brave, a small assertion of humanity against the darkness. Cole let it anchor him as they rode toward whatever came next. They traveled through the night and into the next day, stopping only to rest the horses and grab brief moments of sleep. The terrain gradually shifted from wild frontier to settled land. More farms, more fences, more signs of human habitation. More witnesses who might remember seeing them. Cole kept them off main roads when possible, using game trails and creek beds to minimize their visibility. Old cavalry tactics for moving behind enemy lines. Naya followed without complaint, trusting his judgment even when the path got difficult. On the second evening, as Cheyenne's lights appeared on the horizon, they stopped to make camp in a small stand of cottonwoods near a creek. No fire, too visible. They ate cold jerky and hardtack while the horses grazed. Last chance to change your mind, Cole said. Naya looked toward the distant lights. Are you changing yours? No? Then neither am I. She turned to face him. Cole, whatever happens tonight, I want you to know something. You gave me hope. For the first time in 6 years, I believe I might actually have a future. Even if we fail, even if Jessup kills us both, you gave me that. Nobody can take it away. Cole's chest felt tight. We're not going to fail. But if we do, we won't. He met her eyes. I didn't survive 8 years alone just to die in some brothel fire. And you didn't survive 6 years of hell just to give up now. We're going to burn those records, destroy his hold on you, and ride out of there before he knows what hit him. You sound very confident for someone who called this plan insane. Fake it till you make it, old cavalry saying. Naya laughed, soft and genuine. The sound seemed to surprise her as much as it did Cole. When was the last time she'd laughed? When was the last time Cole had heard laughter and didn't flinch from it? Get some rest, he said. We move at midnight. They took turns sleeping, 2-hour shifts of restless dozing while the other kept watch. Cole's shift came last, the hours between 10 and midnight when the world was deepest dark and every sound seemed magnified. He spent the time checking weapons for the dozenth time, making sure every pistol was loaded, every rifle ready, every knife sharp. Preparation was the only control he had over what came next. At 1:45, he woke Naya gently. It's time. She sat up immediately, no grogginess, fear or adrenaline keeping sleep shallow. I'm ready. They saddled the horses in silence and began the final approach to Cheyenne. The town sprawled across the prairie like a wound in the earth, lights glowing against the darkness. Music and shouting drifted on the wind, saloons doing steady business despite the late hour. Cole led them around the town's perimeter, approaching from the east where Jessup's brothel sat like a red beacon. Just as Naya described, 2 stories, painted blood red. Guards visible at the front entrance even from a distance. They left the horses tied in an alley 2 blocks away, positioned for quick escape. Cole checked his weapons one final time. 2 Colts, one in his holster and one tucked in his belt. A knife strapped to his calf. The Winchester stayed with the horses, too visible for close work. Naya carried a single pistol and a knife. Her face was pale, but determined. "Back entrance," Cole whispered. "Like we planned." They moved through shadows toward their target, 2 ghosts seeking revenge on the living. The back alley reeked of rotting garbage and human waste, a smell that made Naya's stomach turn but also felt grimly appropriate. This was the reality behind Jessup's empire, the ugliness hidden behind red paint and piano music. Cole pressed against the wall, motioning for Naya to stay close. A single guard stood by the rear entrance, smoking a cigarette and looking thoroughly bored with his assignment. Young, maybe 25, with the slack posture of someone who'd never actually faced real danger. That was about to change. Cole moved like a shadow, crossing the 15 feet between them before the guard even registered movement. His knife found the man's throat in one smooth motion, cutting off any cry for help. The guard's eyes went wide with shock and terror as Cole lowered him silently to the ground. "I'm sorry," Cole whispered, and meant it. But sorry didn't stop what needed doing. Naya appeared at his shoulder, her face averted from the dying man. She'd seen death before, Cole knew, but that didn't make witnessing it easier. He retrieved the guard's keys and tried them one by one in the back door lock until he found the right fit. The door swung open on well-oiled hinges, revealing a narrow hallway lit by dim lamps. Piano music and laughter filtered down from upstairs, along with sounds that made Naya's jaw clench tight. "Office is that way," she breathed, pointing left. "Third door on the right." They moved quickly through the corridor, every sense alert for movement. The building's layout was designed for discretion and control. Narrow halls that forced single-file movement, strategic placement of lamps to eliminate shadows, doors positioned so anyone inside could see approaching visitors. But it also worked against defenders if attackers knew the layout. The office door was locked. Cole knelt and worked his picks carefully, aware that every second they spent exposed increased the danger. Behind him, Naya watched the corridor with Cole's spare pistol held in a white-knuckled grip. The lock clicked open. Inside, the office was exactly what Cole expected. A businessman's working space dressed up to look respectable. Desk made of dark wood, filing cabinets along one wall, a small safe in the corner. Ledgers stacked neatly, correspondence sorted into labeled folders. The careful organization of a man who believed in systems and control. All of it was about to burn. "Find your papers," Cole said quietly. "I'll handle the rest." Naya moved to the filing cabinets while Cole pulled out the lamp oil he'd brought. He began splashing it across the desk, the ledgers, the stacked papers. The acrid smell filled the small room, making his eyes water. "Cole," Naya's voice was tight, "there's at least 30 sets of papers here. 30 girls he owns or claims to own." Cole joined her at the open cabinet. She was right. Each folder held documents of sale, contracts of indenture, bills of transfer. A catalog of human beings reduced to property. Some of the girls were as young as 12 when they'd been sold. "Take them all," Cole said. "Every single one burns." They worked quickly, pulling files and stacking them on the desk. Cole continued dousing everything in lamp oil, the fumes growing stronger. They'd need to light it and get clear fast before the smoke overcame them. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Cole and Naya froze. Through the partially open door, they could see a shadow moving, someone approaching with heavy, deliberate footsteps. Not the casual walk of a guard on routine patrol. This was purposeful movement. The door swung fully open. The man standing there was tall and broad, wearing an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the brutal physicality underneath. His face was hard and weathered, with eyes that held the particular coldness of someone who'd hurt people and enjoyed it. He looked at the oil-soaked office, at Cole and Naya standing amid the evidence of their sabotage, and smiled. "Well now," he said, "this is interesting." Cole's hand moved toward his Colt, but the man was faster. A pistol appeared in his hand with practiced speed, aimed directly at Cole's chest. "I wouldn't. You're fast, but nobody's that fast." The man's smile widened. "You must be the homesteader who killed Frank and his boys. Gotta say, I expected someone bigger, more impressive. Jessup, Cole said flatly, in the flesh. And you must be my property that decided to run. His gaze shifted to Naya, and something ugly flickered in his expression. Hello, darling. Miss me? Naya's face had gone white, but her voice came out steady. Go to hell. Eventually, probably, but not tonight. Jessup's pistol remained rock steady. Tonight, I recover stolen goods and deal with the thief who thought he could rob me. Seems straightforward. Cole's mind raced through options. Jessup had the drop on them, and his position in the doorway blocked easy escape. Fighting would get one or both of them killed, but surrender meant the same outcome, just slower and more painful. Which left talking. You know we've already won, Cole said. All your records are soaked in oil. One match, and 6 years of documentation goes up in smoke. Every contract, every sale, every girl you claim to own, all of it gone. True, Jessup acknowledged. That would hurt. Cost me time and money to rebuild, but I'd still have the girl, and I'd still have the pleasure of killing you very slowly for the disrespect you've shown me. What do you want, Jessup? Really want? The question seemed to surprise him. Excuse me? You're a businessman. Everything's a transaction, a calculation of profit and loss. So calculate this one. You kill us both, you burn the town's sympathy because everyone will hear about the man who murdered people over runaway whores. You let us burn these records and walk away. You lose some documentation, but keep your reputation and avoid a war with someone who's already killed 7 of your men. Jessup's eyes narrowed. You're negotiating? I'm offering you a way to walk away from this that doesn't end with your business in ruins or you dead. Bold words from a man with a gun pointed at him. True words from a man who has nothing left to lose. Cole met Jessup's gaze steadily. You're smart enough to know that making me desperate makes me dangerous. Right now I'm offering you a deal. Say no, and things get messy for everyone. For a long moment, Jessup studied them both. Cole could see the calculation happening behind those cold eyes, weighing profit against cost, reputation against revenge, certainty against risk. What's your offer? Jessup said finally. We burn the records. You claim the fire was an accident. Blame it on a careless guard or a knocked-over lamp. Naya disappears. No more property to recover, no more legal claim. You write it off as a loss and move on. In exchange, I don't come back to burn down your other businesses or kill everyone who works for you. You think you could do that? I killed 7 armed men on my own land. You think I couldn't kill you in your sleep if I put my mind to it? Jessup's jaw tightened. And if I refuse? If I shoot you both right now and rebuild my records? Then the last thing you see will be this room exploding, Cole said calmly. I've got a match in my hand. You pull that trigger, my reflexes fire, and this whole place goes up with all of us inside. Your girls upstairs, your guards, your customers. Everyone dies screaming. That the legacy you want? It was a bluff. Cole had no match ready, but his hand was hidden at his side, and Jessup couldn't see whether he was lying. The silence stretched taut as a drawn bowstring. You're insane, Jessup said quietly. Probably. So are we dealing or dying? Naya hadn't moved or spoken, but Cole could feel her tension beside him. Everything balanced on Jessup's next words. One wrong answer and they'd all be dancing with death. Jessup's pistol lowered fractionally. You've got stones, I'll give you that. Most men would be begging by now. I stopped begging for anything 8 years ago. I can see that. Jessup holstered his weapon slowly, deliberately. All right, here's my counteroffer. You burn the records. The girl walks away and I never pursue her legal claim. But you owe me. Owe you what? A debt to be called in later. Someday I'm going to need someone with your particular skills, and when I do, you come when called. One job, no questions asked. Cole's instinct screamed refusal. Getting into debt with a man like Jessup was poison, but the alternative was certain death for him and Naya both. How do I know you'll honor this? You don't. But I'm a businessman, like you said. I honor my deals because my reputation depends on it. You complete one job for me, we're square. The girl stays free, you go back to your cabin or wherever, and we never cross paths again. It was a devil's bargain, but it was also a way out. Cole looked at Naya. Her eyes were wide with fear and confusion, but also trust. Whatever he decided, she'd back him. One job, Cole said. Nothing that involves killing innocents or hurting women and children. Agreed. And Naya's papers, all of them, burn right now. No copies, no claims, no pursuit. She's free. Agreed. Jessup smiled coldly. I'm even going to do you one better. All 30 sets of papers in that cabinet, they all burn. Consider it a gesture of good faith. Cole hadn't expected that. Why? Because those girls are a liability now. You've made them famous with this little stunt. Better to cut losses and start fresh than deal with the attention. Jessup shrugged. Besides, I can always acquire more inventory. The world's full of desperate people. The casual cruelty of those words made Cole's hand itch toward his pistol. But Naya's gentle touch on his arm stopped him. Do we have a deal? Jessup asked. Cole extended his hand. Deal. They shook. Jessup's grip was firm and dry, the handshake of men conducting business. When he released, Cole felt like he needed to wash his hands. You've got 5 minutes to light it and clear out, Jessup said. After that, I start screaming about arson, and you're both outlaws. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Cole and Naya stood frozen until the sound faded completely. Did that really just happen? Naya whispered. Yeah. Cole pulled out an actual match this time. And now we burn it all before he changes his mind. He struck the match and touched it to the oil-soaked desk. The flame caught instantly, spreading fast across the wood and paper. Within seconds, the entire desk was ablaze, fire licking up the stacked documents with hungry intensity. Naya grabbed one of her own folders, the one containing her sale papers, and threw it into the flames herself. Burn, she said fiercely. Burn it all! The fire spread to the filing cabinets, consuming 30 sets of papers that represented 30 lives reduced to property. The heat grew intense, forcing Cole and Naya back toward the door. Time to go, Cole said. They ran. Behind them, smoke poured from the office, and someone was already shouting about fire. But Jessup's voice rose above the chaos, ordering people to evacuate calmly, claiming a lamp had been knocked over, taking control of the narrative just as he'd promised. Cole and Naya burst out the back door into the alley. The guard's body was already gone. Jessup's people worked fast. They sprinted toward where they'd left the horses, expecting pursuit or gunfire at any moment. Nothing came. Jessup was honoring the deal, at least for now. They reached the alley where Red and the roan mare waited patiently. Cole boosted Naya into her saddle before mounting Red. Behind them, orange light flickered from the brothel's windows as fire consumed 6 years of human trafficking documentation. Ride, Cole said. They rode, not the panicked flight of fugitives, but the steady, distance-eating pace of people who knew pursuit wasn't coming. They left Cheyenne behind as flames climbed into the night sky, visible for miles across the dark prairie. Neither of them spoke until the town's lights had disappeared completely behind them. We did it, Naya said finally. Her voice held wonder and disbelief in equal measure. We actually did it. We survived, Cole corrected, which isn't the same as winning. I'm free, legally free. How is that not winning? Cole thought about the deal he'd made, the debt now hanging over him, the promise to Jessup that would come due eventually. Because freedom always costs something. We just don't know the full price yet. You're thinking about the job he'll call in. Yeah. Naya rode in silence for a moment, then, whatever it is, we'll face it together, like we did tonight. I can't ask you to... You're not asking, I'm offering. Her voice was firm. You saved my life, Cole. Multiple times. You think I'm going to walk away just because the danger's over? The danger's never over. That's what I'm trying to tell you. I know, but being alone isn't safer. It's just lonelier. You taught me that. Cole didn't know how to respond. The idea of not being alone anymore, of having someone choose to stay despite knowing the risks, it felt foreign and frightening and strangely wonderful. They rode through the remainder of the night and into the next day, putting distance between themselves and Cheyenne. By afternoon, familiar territory emerged, the rolling hills and pine stands that marked the approach to Cole's land. Home. The word felt different now. As they crested the final ridge and the cabin came into view, Cole felt something shift in his chest. 8 years he'd lived there alone, and it had been enough. A place to exist, to survive, to keep breathing through each day. But looking at it now, with Naya riding beside him, it felt like possibility instead of exile. They dismounted at the small corral. Red and the mare were exhausted but unharmed, and they drank deeply from the trough while Cole and Naya unsaddled them with practiced efficiency. "I'll get them fed," Naya said. "You should rest." "I'm fine." "Cole, you haven't slept in 2 days. Go inside. I can handle the horses." He started to argue, then recognized the stubborn set of her jaw. Emma had looked like that when her mind was made up. Fighting it was pointless. "All right, but just for an hour." "Sure," Naya said with a small smile that suggested she knew he'd sleep longer than that. Cole stumbled inside the cabin, his exhaustion hitting him all at once now that the immediate danger had passed. He made it to the bed, Naya's bed really, since he'd given it to her, and collapsed fully clothed. Sleep claimed him instantly. When he woke, the sun was setting and the cabin was filled with the smell of cooking food. Cole sat up groggily, disoriented by sleeping in an actual bed instead of on the floor. Naya stood at the fireplace, stirring something in the pot. She'd changed out of her travel-stained clothes into one of the dresses they'd gotten from the general store during their preparations. Her hair was brushed and braided. She looked younger somehow, less burdened, free. "What time is it?" Cole asked. "Near 7. You slept all day." Naya smiled over her shoulder. "Don't worry, I kept watch. Nobody came." "You should have woken me." "Why?" "You needed rest, and I was perfectly capable of standing guard for a few hours." She ladled stew into 2 bowls. "Besides, I've been thinking." "About?" "About what happens now. We burned Jessup's records. I'm legally free, but we can't stay here. He knows where you live." Cole had been thinking the same thing. "Yeah, we'll need to move on, find somewhere new. Or," Naya set the bowls on the table and sat across from him, "or we stay, make our stand here." "That's suicide. When Jessup calls in his debt, he'll know exactly where to find me." "True, but running just means he'll find you somewhere else, somewhere you don't have home advantage. Here, you know the terrain. You've got defensible positions. You've already proven you can hold it against superior numbers. That was luck as much as skill, and preparation, and courage, and refusal to give up." Naya met his eyes. "Cole, I spent 6 years running from one form of captivity into another. I'm done running. If Jessup comes, we face him here, together. And if he sends men to collect his debt, you complete the job and come back. This place is worth fighting for. It's just a cabin." "No, it's home. Maybe not home the way it was when you built it, a place to hide from the world, but home the way it could be, a place to build a life instead of just surviving." Cole looked around the small cabin, the same rough walls, the same simple furniture, the same few possessions he'd accumulated over 8 years. Nothing had physically changed, but everything felt different. "You want to stay," he said slowly. "Really stay, not just until the next crisis. I want to build something, with you, if you'll have me. Not as your obligation or your burden, but as your partner." Naya's voice was steady. "I know I don't bring much. No money, no property, just myself and a willingness to work. But if you're willing to take a chance, yes." The word came out before Cole fully thought it through, but once spoken, he didn't want to take it back. Naya's eyes widened. "Yes? Yes, stay. Build something. Be partners." Cole felt a smile tug at his mouth, an expression that felt rusty and unused. "Fair warning, I'm not easy to live with. I'm stubborn and closed off, and I've forgotten how to talk to people. I'm damaged and scared, and I wake up screaming most nights. Guess we're both projects." "Guess so." They ate their stew in comfortable silence, the kind that came from genuine companionship instead of mere proximity. Outside, night settled over the frontier with its usual quiet intensity. Stars emerged one by one, and somewhere an owl called its hunting cry. After dinner, they sat on the porch together, watching the darkness and listening to the familiar sounds of Cole's land. Red and the mare dozed in the corral. The chickens were safely locked in their coop. Everything was peaceful and ordinary. It wouldn't last. Cole knew that. Jessup's debt would come due eventually. Other dangers would emerge. The frontier never ran short on threats. Life would continue to be hard and uncertain and potentially short. But for the first time in 8 years, Cole wasn't facing it alone. "Tell me about Emma," Naya said quietly. "Not how she died. How she lived." The request surprised Cole. Most people avoided mentioning the dead, as if speaking their names would summon ghosts. But maybe that's exactly what needed summoning, not the pain of loss, but the memory of love. "She laughed loud," Cole said after a moment. "Like she didn't care who heard. She couldn't sing worth a damn, but did it anyway. She believed in people even when they disappointed her. And she made me want to be better than I was." "She sounds wonderful." She was. But she was also stubborn and reckless and completely incapable of minding her own business when she saw injustice. Cole smiled, despite the ache in his chest. "She would have liked you, I think. Would have approved of someone who kept fighting even when fighting seemed pointless." "You think she'd approve of us? This partnership?" Cole considered that. Would Emma want him to find companionship again? Would she understand why he'd chosen to help Naya despite the risks? The answer came easier than expected. "Yeah, she'd approve. She always said isolation was my worst instinct, that I needed people even when I pretended I didn't. She'd be happy I finally listened." "I wish I could have met her." "Me too." They sat in companionable silence as the stars wheeled overhead. Eventually, Naya's breathing evened into the rhythm of sleep. She dozed off against Cole's shoulder, exhaustion finally claiming her. Cole didn't move, didn't want to disturb her rest, so he sat and watched the night and thought about how strange life was, how it could take everything away and then offer unexpected gifts when you'd stopped looking for them. The next morning brought practical considerations. They had work to do if they were really staying, repairs to make, preparations for winter, improvements to the cabin now that 2 people would share it. Cole began planning a second room, an addition that would give them both privacy while maintaining the security of a shared structure. Naya threw herself into the work with enthusiasm that sometimes outpaced her still healing shoulder. Cole had to remind her repeatedly to take breaks, to not push too hard too fast. "I'm fine," she'd insist, then wince when she tried to lift something too heavy. "You're stubborn is what you are," says the man who refused to let 7 armed riders scare him off his own land. "That's different." "How?" Cole didn't have a good answer for that. Days turned into weeks. The work progressed steadily. The addition took shape, rough timber walls rising beside the original cabin. Naya proved surprisingly capable with tools, her hands adapting quickly to physical labor. They developed rhythms and routines, an easy partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. The nightmares continued for both of them, but less frequently. Some nights, Naya would wake screaming and Cole would talk her down until she remembered where she was and that she was safe. Other nights, Cole would jerk awake, reaching for weapons that weren't needed, and Naya would sit with him until the phantom threats faded. They didn't talk about it much. Didn't need to. Understanding existed in the spaces between words. 6 weeks after their return from Cheyenne, a rider appeared on the horizon. Cole saw him first, a single figure approaching slowly from the south, hands visible and empty. Not attacking, but definitely purposeful. "Naya, get inside," Cole said quietly. She'd been hanging laundry but dropped it immediately and moved toward the cabin. Not panicking, just following established protocol. They drilled for this scenario, practiced what to do if unexpected visitors arrived. Cole positioned himself on the porch, Winchester in hand but not raised, watchful, ready. The rider drew closer, and Cole recognized him with a jolt. Billy, the young man from Frank's crew who'd run during the first fight. Cole's hand tightened on the Winchester, but he didn't aim it. Billy approached slowly, stopping 20 yards out with his hands clearly visible. "Don't shoot," Billy called. "Please, I'm not here for trouble." "Then why are you here?" "To deliver a message from Mr. Jessup." Cole's jaw tightened. So it was starting. The debt being called in already. "Go ahead." Billy pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and held it up. "He said to give you this. Said you'd know what it means." "Toss it here. Slow." Billy threw the paper carefully. It landed in the dirt halfway between them. Cole kept his eyes on Billy while Naya emerged from the cabin and retrieved the paper. She brought it to Cole, who unfolded it with one hand while keeping the Winchester trained on their visitor. The message was brief and written in neat script. "Riker, Our agreement stands. When I need your services, you'll be contacted. Until then, the girl stays free and unbothered. I'm a man of my word. Are you? Jessup. Beneath the message was another line. Billy wants work. He's done with my business. Figured you might need a hand building that addition. Consider it a gesture of goodwill. Cole looked up at Billy, who sat his horse with visible nervousness. Is this true? Cole asked. You're done with Jessup? Yes, sir. After what happened in the Pines, after watching what you did to Frank and the others, I realized I didn't want to die for money that wasn't mine. Billy's voice was young and earnest. I've got family back east. Was planning to go back to them, but Mr. Jessup said you might need help. Said you were building something worth building. Jessup said that? His exact words were, the stubborn son of a bitch is trying to make something decent in this godforsaken territory. Might as well help him, since I owe him a debt. Billy almost smiled. I think that's the closest he gets to respect. Cole looked at Naya. She shrugged, leaving the decision to him. Truth was, they could use the help. Building the addition was slow work with just 2 people, especially with Naya's shoulder still not at full strength. And Billy had proven during the fight that he had more sense than loyalty to bad causes. Can you handle a saw? Cole asked. Billy's face lit up. Yes, sir. And hammer, drill, plane. My daddy was a carpenter before he died. Taught me the trade. 3 meals a day and a place to sleep in the barn until the addition's finished. After that, we'll see about longer term. That's more than fair. Thank you, Mr. Riker. It's just Cole. Mr. Riker was my father, and he was an asshole. Cole finally lowered the Winchester. Get your horse settled and we'll show you what needs doing. Billy dismounted with visible relief, leading his horse toward the corral. Naya watched him go, then turned to Cole. You trust him? Not yet. But people deserve second chances. He ran when he could have fought. That shows better judgment than most. Or cowardice. Sometimes cowardice and wisdom look the same from certain angles. Cole folded Jessup's message and tucked it in his pocket. Besides, I'm not in a position to judge anyone's past mistakes. Over the following weeks, Billy proved his worth. He was a skilled carpenter, and his youthful energy complemented Cole's experience and Naya's determination. The addition progressed faster than Cole had hoped. Walls went up straight and true, roof beams were fitted with precision, and slowly the cabin expanded into something that could genuinely house multiple people comfortably. Billy was also good company. He told stories of his travels, made Naya laugh with his observations about frontier life, and gave Cole someone to talk to about things that didn't involve survival or violence. The young man had a gentle soul that seemed at odds with how he'd ended up working for Jessup. I was desperate, Billy explained one evening as they worked. Daddy died. Mama got sick. I needed money for medicine. Jessup paid well, and I didn't ask questions I should have. By the time I realized what kind of man he was, I was already in too deep. But you got out, Naya said, thanks to Cole scaring the hell out of me. Sometimes fear's a good teacher. Best kind, Cole agreed. Fear keeps you honest. The work continued through fall and into early winter. By the time the first serious snow fell, the addition was complete. 2 additional rooms that gave everyone privacy while maintaining the communal heart of the original cabin. Billy had proven himself reliable enough that Cole offered him permanent employment, helping expand the ranch. Ranch? Billy asked. You thinking of getting cattle? Thinking we need income besides subsistence farming. Cattle make sense. Maybe horses too if we can acquire breeding stock. We'd need more hands for that. Then we'll find more hands. Carefully. People who understand what we're building here. What they were building was more than just structures. It was community. A place where people who'd been broken by the frontier could find purpose and safety. Where second chances were possible and past mistakes didn't define future possibilities. It was the opposite of isolation, and it terrified Cole almost as much as it excited him. Winter passed slowly, as it always did in Wyoming. They huddled by fires and maintained equipment and planned for spring. Naya learned to shoot with increasing accuracy. Billy proved adept at breaking horses. Cole taught them both survival skills he'd learned in the cavalry. And through it all, the specter of Jessup's debt hung unspoken in the background. Cole knew it would come due eventually, knew that whatever job Jessup demanded would test the fragile peace they'd built. But worrying about future problems was pointless when present problems demanded attention. Spring arrived with its usual drama. Sudden warmth followed by late snows, muddy trails, and rushing creeks, the land transforming from dead to alive almost overnight. They planted a larger garden, reinforced fences, and made plans to acquire their first cattle. Life had found its rhythm. Not easy or simple, but purposeful and shared. On a warm evening in early May, nearly 8 months after Cole had first found Naya collapsed and bleeding on his land, they sat together on the expanded porch and watched the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. "You ever regret it?" Naya asked quietly. "Helping me that first night?" Cole thought about the question seriously. His life had been simpler before, undeniably. Safer in the way that isolation provides safety. But simple and safe weren't the same as meaningful or fulfilling. "No," he said finally. "I regret a lot of things, but helping you isn't one of them." Even knowing Jessup's debt is still out there? Even knowing that. Whatever comes, we'll handle it. Together. Together, Naya echoed. She reached over and took his hand, a gesture that had become natural over the months, but still sent warmth through Cole's chest. "Thank you for seeing me as worth saving, for giving me a chance at a real life." "You saved yourself," Cole corrected. "I just got in the way of the people chasing you." "You did more than that, and you know it." Maybe he did. Or maybe they'd saved each other in ways that went beyond physical rescue. Maybe that's what partnership meant, mutual salvation through shared purpose. Billy emerged from the barn, dusting hay off his clothes. "Horses are settled for the night. Anything else need doing?" "We're good," Cole said. "Get some rest." "Yes, sir. Night, Cole." "Night, Naya." They watched him head toward his small cabin, another addition to their growing community. A good kid who'd found his way out of darkness with a little help. "Think we should tell him?" Naya asked when Billy was out of earshot. "Tell him what?" "About Jessup's debt, about what might come." Cole had been wondering the same thing. Billy deserved to know what he might be walking into by staying here. But knowledge was also burden, and the kid had already carried enough of those. Eventually, Cole decided, when it becomes relevant, no point worrying him about maybe. "You're getting soft in your old age." "I'm 34. "Ancient," Naya teased, then grew serious. "Cole, whatever happens when Jessup calls in that debt, I'm going with you." "Absolutely not." "Not asking permission." "Naya, we're partners, remember? Partners don't let each other walk into danger alone." "This is different. The deal was my debt, my obligation. And I'm the reason you owe that debt in the first place. So we're in this together, whether you like it or not." Cole wanted to argue, wanted to insist she stay safe while he handled the consequences of his choices. But the stubborn set of her jaw told him arguing was pointless. Besides, she was right. They were partners, and partners face things together. "Fine," he conceded. "But we do it smart. Planned. No unnecessary risks." "Agreed," Naya smiled. "See? We're already getting better at this compromise thing." The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky streaked with purple and gold. Stars began to emerge. The same stars that had witnessed Cole's arrival here 8 years ago. The same stars that had seen him build walls and hide from the world. The same stars that were now witnessing something new. A life built on connection instead of isolation, on purpose instead of mere survival. It wouldn't be easy. Jessup's debt would come due eventually. Other threats would emerge. The frontier never stopped testing those who tried to build something lasting. But for the first time since Emma's death, Cole believed something was worth fighting for beyond simple survival. He had a home, a partner, a purpose. He had a future. And when Jessup's reckoning came, he'd face it the same way he'd faced everything else since that night he'd heard Naya scream in the darkness. With courage born of caring, with determination forged through shared struggle, and with the absolute certainty that some things were worth any price. The frontier was still unforgiving, still brutal, still ready to take everything from anyone who let their guard down. But Cole Riker was no longer facing it alone, and that made all the difference.